You're all very most welcome to this meeting of the Society of Wetland Scientists Europe chapter. Is our second day. We have two keynote lectures today, and after that we have seven contributed paper presentations. So I'm very lucky, I'm very happy with this program, and I'm sure you all like it very much. Before we go further, I would like to encourage you to contribute to the discussions. We have two discussion moments, and an interaction with the audience is always very nice for all presenters. So please don't forget that. And now I give the floor back to Matt, who has some more technical indications. Matt?
Okay, thank you, Jos, and welcome to everyone. I see people are still coming in, so I shall speak a little slowly as people come into the meeting. It's very nice to see you back again. As Jos says, we've got a really nice program again today, so I hope you will enjoy it. For people who did not attend yesterday, I would just go through some basic functions of how the Zoom webinar meeting works. So there are two ways that you can ask questions of our presenters, and you'll have a chance at the end of each of our keynotes presentations to ask a question. And you'll also have a chance in the discussion sessions at the end of each section. So you can ask a question by putting it in the Q&A box, which you can see is here. And you can also ask a question by raising your hand. And we really encourage you to do this because it would be nice to hear your voices. So please raise your hand and then I can unmute you and then we can have questions from you. If you've got any technical issues or general comments, then put these into the chat, which is found here, just to the right of the Q&A. And some people asked yesterday that it would be really nice to see a participant list. Now, unfortunately, within Zoom webinar, we can't show you everyone that's attending. But what we thought was that if you'd like to say who you are in the chat, then other people at least will see that you are here. So if you'd like to put your name in the chat and maybe what organization you're from, then please feel free to do that. Just make sure that it goes to all panelists and all attendees so that other people can see who's online today. Okay, well, that's enough from me. I will now hand back to Jos to continue the introduction today.
Thank you, Matt. Again, I'm very pleased to chair this day for you. We will first now have a celebration rather than presentations. This is the highlight about the Lake Ohrid and Studentskiste Mars designation as a Ramsar site. This issue has been with us for 6 years already, because in 2015 we were approached through a member in Valencia by Nadezhda Apostolova, who informed us about a very negative development in Lake Ohrid in Macedonia, where there is the last wetland connected to this lake was threatened by plans for tourist accommodation. We have then written letters to the authorities in Macedonia, and SWS headquarters has also participated in that. And also Nadezhda has become a member of our society and came to our meeting in Potsdam in 2016 to present this case to us as members. And then it was striking that the next day there was even in a Macedonian newspaper, it was indicated that she was in Potsdam presenting this paper. So it had already some impact in the press locally. And then long years followed with many activities. One of them was that in 2018, we organized our annual meeting in Ohrid, Macedonia, so that we had much more opportunity to interact with the authorities there, the mayor of Ohrid, ministry, there were several people who came to our meeting and who we could discuss with. Nadezhda has offered now to give a short presentation about this site, and also she will then bring us the good news that the goal designation by Ramsar has actually been reached. After Nadezhda, I also will ask Tobia Salate of the Ramsar Bureau to comment on this, and I hope also Alessio Sata, I mean. So first now, Nadezhda, please go ahead. And thank you for all you did.
Okay, so thank you. So can you, Matt, can you share the presentation if you have it there? Thank you. Okay, so really thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to briefly tell you who we are. And I think this is a good example for people to see that citizens' initiatives can work. And we have really achieved something that we thought wasn't going to be possible. At several points, I really was going to give up because this looked like something that we were never going to achieve. So Ohrid SOS Citizens Initiative began in 2016. And this was, 2015. And this was because of a public consultation, which was meant to approve the changes to an urban plan, which intended to drain and convert to the Inchiste Marsh, and that is the last remaining marsh on the shore of Ohrid Lake, into a marina and luxury resort. And this was together with other development plans, very negative ones. And this is what made us really mobilize, right? We're not an NGO, for you people to know. It's good to understand the difference. We don't have a bank account, okay? So we are just really like a group of people who are enthusiasts who work on a completely volunteer basis. And there are different types of people here. I mean, I'm a scientist, although I do something completely different. I'm a pharmacologist. And we also have people from all different areas. So what we did was, so can you go to the, I'm not sure I can go to the other slide, to the next slide. Okay, thank you. So the first thing we did was to prepare to launch a declaration on preserving the world natural and cultural heritage of Ohrid. And this was supported by several hundreds of people from Macedonia and from other countries. It was even supported by more than 300 scientists. And I guess some of you were also there. And we had a lot of positive comments on our website by different scientists saying that this is really a must, that Ohrid Lake is something that really needs to be preserved. So can you go to the following? I can't, can I? Yes, okay. So what did we do? What kind of activities we do and we did? Well, many different activities. Some are, well, the ones that many NGOs do, such as meetings, conferences, photo competitions, and so on. But very importantly, we decided that our priority was to contact international agencies to give visibility on an international level of this problem. And we contacted, and we still do, IUCN, UNESCO, Ramsar, and very importantly, SWS. And as Jos said, we started this communication in 2015. I joined in 2016, the initiative. And the culmination of this was the meeting in Ohrid in 2018. So we have really been supported by you since the very beginning, and we wouldn't have made it without your support. So I would really like to stress that, to make it really clear. So can you please go to the last slide, yes. So regarding Ramsar designation, this has been a very rough and very long road. So we started this back in 2015 as a problem. In 2017, we formally presented initiative to the government regarding Ramsar designation of Ohrid together with Studenčiste. The government in 2018 formally announced that they were going to do it, but they didn't do much, and everything was kept being postponed. We had constant correspondence with the Macedonian Ramsar Committee, with the ministry, different sort of meetings, letters coming and going, a lot of pressure on the institutions. a lot of interests. The area is under severe pressure because of tourism development. So it was a really complicated process. Finally, in 2019, they said, well, why don't you complete the Ramsar information sheet? They thought that was a mission impossible for us. We said, yes, fine. And we did it on a completely voluntary basis. We were supported by you, by SWS, and we were supported by Ramsar in this process. So there was a draft first in March, and there was a full version in July. We submitted that to the ministry. And finally, in February 2021, Ohrid Lake, together with Studenčiste, was designated as a Ramsar site. So a very complicated road, but still successful one. I would just like to mention that the only thing that wasn't fully, they didn't really did what we said was regarding the boundaries. So there is part of the boundaries where, they were left, part of the area that was proposed by us was left out. And that is the area around the town of Struga, which many of you maybe visited when you were in Ohrid in 2018. So this was left out of the proposed boundaries. Okay, so that will be it. I still have one last slide. Matt, if you can share it with the audience. So the road to success is always under construction. We still haven't completed our mission, and we're fully devoted to Ohrid and Prespa. I will be talking about Prespa today. Again, I would like to stress that we are grateful especially to YOS and to SWS in general, about really being there for us on a daily basis for the last 6 years. I really thank you very much. Yes, you're mute, I think.
I now would like to thank you, Nadezhda. I would like to ask Tobias Salatay to give a few comments. We do not have much time anymore, but please, it is nice to hear also from the Ramsar organization some words. Thank you, Tobias.
Thanks for the invitation. I hope you hear me.
Yes.
First, congratulations to Nadezhda and her colleagues for that achievement. It is on the road, and she mentioned the road at the end. I know that there are also physical road construction discussed, so that is where we need to have a watchful eye around the lake. But it is a great achievement, and it shows what the Society of Wetland Scientists can do, what the scientists can do to advance the uptake of what the scientists tell the decision makers. We do realize also more generally a better involvement of the North Macedonian authorities. There is a generation change also happening. So I think we are looking very much forward. And just a last word, and because Nadezhda mentioned it, that there is, or two words. One, the UN decade on ecosystem restoration starts. So maybe next step would be focusing on restoring part of the Struga marshes. And the last one is also the same authorities from Skopje have asked us to look into the Prespa issues, because the Prespa lakes upstream is obviously directly linked with Ohrid, about the water management there. So this is also in ongoing, and I can assure you that I just sent a message back to the Council of Europe, and we are also in contact with the World Heritage Center, because those sites are also concerned by those international agreements and organizations. So thanks and congratulations for what has been achieved so far, and we're working together, we're continuing.
Thank you very much, Tobias.
Thank you very much.
And I would like to encourage everyone to visit the area in Macedonia, maybe again, because most of you have been already there. It's a fantastic area, and also there are opportunities for ecotourism, and I think it will be a support for the people who want to develop such kind of uses of this beautiful area, if you as interested people and scientists will just visit. Thank you very much. I would like now to go to the rest of the program of today. We have two different keynote lectures, and the first one is also by Tobias Salathe. This is all about networking, creating networks, especially with young scientists, and the title of his lecture is Connecting Young Wetland Scientists with Other Professionals. And Tobias is the representative for Europe of the Ramsar Secretariat in Switzerland, Galan. Okay, Tobias, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'd like to take you to a small walk around our favorite wetland, a walk during which we can make a few reflections on how we as scientists can best connect to the rest of the world and how we can make most use of our wetland science. I'm addressing mainly the younger amongst us because it's you who are inheriting the problems that the older ones have left for you, and will have to find solutions for them. But obviously the reflections may be valid or valuable for all of us. Let's start with a first point. We are all trained as scientists, and we have been educated with a certain ethic that we do develop hypotheses and that we are going to test them, that we are looking for facts, for data that underlines what we are taking as conclusions. And that is what we are believing in, and that is our ethics. And that is important because it's a fundamental part of finding solutions. At least this is what we are believing. However, there are not only scientists in the world, and therefore the real great scientists, like this man here on the picture, were probably becoming so well known and respected because they cultivated also the non-scientist part in themselves. So let's think about that although our behavior and our work is based on the scientific approach and what the scientific ethic would be, we do also need to take into account other parts of human behavior and of human positive inferences. Ideally, we do not want to work in isolation, although our subject may be very passionating and bringing us far. If we want to produce something that is valid and can be taken up by others, by those societies around us, by those who make the decisions, for instance, for the common sustainable development goals as they are listed here on the right of the picture, then we obviously do want to work with others. And that should not only include those colleagues who are in the same team than we are, who are researching similar subjects than we are. It should ideally also include colleagues who are coming from different disciplines. If I'm a geologist working with biologists, working with hydrologists, etc. But not only, think a little bit how many of your research themes, research projects are working with scientists from other disciplines, from other faculties. If I am in natural science, have I worked a lot with social scientists, with historic scientists, with economic specialists? Although we hardly do it, wetlands are an ideal subject to bring those different disciplines and different faculties together, because the wetlands are at the nexus of those different approaches. And I think there lays a lot of opportunity to increase that type of cooperation, also cooperation with other professions, more manual professions, more undertaking professors than the scientists and the researchers. I hope nobody from us has put such a sign like the one on the right hand here on our office or laboratory door. Nobody really wants to do my own science only, at least I hope so. But then immediately a question comes up, do the others understand my science? And now we are getting into a few reflections which may be worthwhile taking, how to communicate and about what to communicate to those who are not from my own field. So I'm thinking ourselves, this inter-faculty dialogue, how much of it does really exist? How much could we do more? We have to start explaining my own language, because it is likely that in my field there has been a development of a lot of technical scientific terms which are not necessarily understood or understood in the same way by others. And then comes a lot of jargon on it. So it is always helpful to think about avoiding such jargon, or at least explaining it well, that the others do understand it. Because let's not forget, everybody of us, each one of us, is a lay person in all fields except in my own. So we ourselves are exposed to the similar situation from the other end as we are when we want to communicate with people from other fields. Developing that common language, a common language, is therefore important. And the language should maybe focusing on what type of public in order to be able to create and convey clear messages. There is that saying, it may make us laugh a little bit, but there is some truth in it, that we could clarify our arguments to make them really sharp and convincing by thinking that we are speaking either to ministers or to children. Why both put into the same sack? Because those high-level decision makers at one end and the open-minded lateral thinkers at the other end are both looking for the same, for clear arguments that they can understand, integrate themselves, and arguments that are convincing because their logic and their power is quite obvious. So in that dialogue, when we are engaging in that dialogue, maybe a good starting point would be to agree with our counterpart. What are the basic values and principles that we both agree upon? Clarify what is what counts for both of us, because we consider this as being essential, basic, and acceptable. And that creates a very solid and helpful base for further engagement together. Let's not forget one big issue which often we have a tendency to forget when we speak with people from the non-scientific sectors. We have been trained to look at facts, to collect data, to establish hypotheses, and to only accept a hypothesis as long as the data are not contradicting it. Therefore, we always focusing on what kind of level of uncertainty we can achieve. So we have a tendency to communicate also to others that yes, we think it is about like this, but there is, however, that level of uncertainty. Unfortunately, this is not at all what the other peoples are waiting to hear from the scientists, because they think that we have to tell them the truth and what is certain. And once we have put this dichotomy again in our mind, then we are probably be better prepared to communicate in the right way. So making that important distinction between two parts of the information is important. The first one, and clarifying this, that these are the established facts because there are a number of data, of information which do support those facts. These facts are widely accepted, and that therefore we hope that everybody can accept them and take them as a basis for further engagement. And making also clear that there are other parts of information, of knowledge, which are not yet widely established and widely accepted, and what part it is of the knowledge that is still uncertain and that needs further research. If you want to illustrate what I'm speaking about, just think about the discussions which are ongoing since the COVID crisis between those scientific task forces speaking in the media and the journalists, the politicians, and so questioning them. So with this in mind as an illustration, I think you can clearly understand how science progresses rapidly in this case, but how science is well advised to make clearly that distinction and obviously adapt and update our discourse according to increasing knowledge and increasing volume of widely accepted knowledge. Because the point is that we want to show to the other professionals that we're all in the same boat, that we therefore have to overcome our internal way of arguing by showing what the others can and should also accept, because it is based on irrefutable and verifiable facts, and clearly by doing so, showing what are the widely agreed basic principles on which we can construct and create a mutual trust, mutual in both sense, in all senses, mutual understanding that everybody takes up what the other tells him or her, adheres to, and in doing so we create that common ownership of what is established and what needs to be done. So coming to the wetland scientists and the wetland subjects, we obviously do want to create a widespread understanding of what are those agreed basic wetland facts. We have here an illustration of a basic wetland scheme. It may be something different, but it is an illustration that we would try to convey to the other professionals, to other people, to the lay people, to the general public, that these are the values, these are the functions of wetlands. And to do that with success, I think it is important to take into account those few ideas I shared with you just before. And we want to go on because we are enthusiastic to promote wetland-based solutions. We are thinking that the wetlands have a lot to give to humanity, to bring to humanity, and that they do this better than other solutions. That's fine, but as a scientist, we probably should do that additional step to work on specific case studies which probably give free added arguments in that nature-based solution debate, added arguments that can convince an engineer, a politician, an entrepreneur, or whoever else is in front of us, is dialoguing with us, or whoever else we have to convince. First idea or first argument would be that we should show that wetland-based solutions are more sustainable than other short-term solutions which only provide short-term gains, so that we can demonstrate with facts the better sustainability. The second argument, which could probably be underlined with scientific data and analysis, is that wetland-based solutions provide more and multiple benefits, not just a one benefit for one stakeholders, but benefits for different stakeholders, for different interests. And the third argument, which hopefully would be convincing, that wetland-based solutions are better integrated solutions, integrated into sustainable development agendas that have to take into account not only the environmental aspects, but also the societal and the economic aspects. So these three axes are probably helpful to direct studies to convince the non-wetland sector about what we believe in, that wetland-based solutions are often better solutions and should be chosen rather than a different solution. So we are now clearly at that so-called interface of science and policy, because let's inspect ourselves. I would assume that all of us think that my science, my research, I would like it to lead to something, that humanity does something with it and improves its actions, that our societies, our decision makers improve policies and rules we apply, and that we do better in practice. Or do we really only want to make our own science in isolation? Probably only a few of us. So being at that interface, where you have to the left, the red parts, science being translated to inform policy, and at the right part, the blue part, the policy makers turning this into rules that can be applied on the ground, we have that important turquoise part in the middle, where there are a number of committees and groups and institutions, and who should make sure that this transfer does work and does function. There are, however, a lot of problems with it if you look at it in reality. So let's maybe, standing here at the scientific side, at the side of the researchers, let's think what type of scientists are essential for that process to run smoothly. We do need scientists who generate knowledge, not just data, but knowledge, so who are able to well analyze the data and create knowledge out of it. We do need scientists who synthesize that knowledge, taking different studies together and making a valid synthesis, which can be communicated by aggregating different syntheses and clearly coming down to a basic understanding of what the knowledge means. These are important functions for scientists, and unfortunately there are only a few working directly in that field. Why it would be really advantageous if we would have more scientists who broker that knowledge to the policymakers, who are really the broker in between. Because the good news here is that policy-relevant research often creates demand for more research, and therefore scientists active in these fields would not have a financing problem. However, we have to be careful that we remain credible, that our research focus remains relevant for the societal needs, and that we keep our legitimacy in order that, in a way that we are objective, transparent, and therefore being perceived as what we are saying is legitimate. In this way, the use of science can indeed improve the decisions that will be made. And I'm probably telling you this by opening a door which is already opened, because a society like yours, the Society of Wetland Scientists, is exactly sitting here at that central part and of the transition of the interface between science and policy. And therefore, your organization can play a very important role in that field. And let's not forget, as we are speaking in a European context, that the European Union is an important partner for that, because it does support scientific research, policy development, and practical implementation through project financing. All this, however, mind the gap. Unfortunately, still those three fields are very much, as often in science, working in their own silos. And those people who do bridging the gap are relatively rare. Those people who bring the science to the policy and to the practice are rare. And I would make a call to all of us, let's try to do our part inside my own project. Let's try to do more, and let's not rely simply on what this could be doing. We are doing some efforts, and there are institutions to translate scientific results into plain language, into language for a lay person. That is fine, but publications show us are not sufficient. We do need our own active behavior, our active engagement, and our own reaching out. The publication, unfortunately, as well as they have been done, are on their own often not sufficient. But I'm very hopeful that the SWS and all of its members can do an important contribution to that, because each of us can bring my knowledge and understanding to those fora, to those people who have a particular position to influence others, to committees, to international programs, to make sure that the science is applied. And as I'm working for the Convention on Wetlands, I would encourage you certainly to make sure that your understanding, your scientific knowledge goes into the knowledge and the understanding of the experts which are on our review panel for scientific and technical issues, because after all, what they are proposing to the decision maker depends on the quality of the inputs they receive from scientists like you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tobias, for this philosophical lecture. I think any scientist, and definitely any wetland scientist, should ask him or herself the questions that were brought to us and think about it. I know that many colleagues already have this drive to extend their knowledge into circles where the knowledge can be maybe used for policy or application, but still we need to much better think of the ways that are the most productive for that. And you are somebody who has quite a lot of experience yourself. You are at the side of the policy, but you also have strong roots in the science, so that really helps. I really would like to open the floor now for some discussion. So if there are people who want to ask questions, then I would be happy to entertain them. Maybe Matt, can you identify people who have indicated that they would like to contribute?
Just check.
Now, maybe I can ask a first question first. The key point is find the way to interact. And do you think that there are this is only possible if there are special platforms, organizations, or should scientists also try to work in their own environment and locally make this step? What do you think is the most productive?
Okay. Hello, I assume you're asking me.
Yes, that's right.
I think wherever you feel like it, wherever it's easiest, there may be those who are working rather through committees, but at your local spot. I think the Studentische Marshes and the Ohrid Lake is one excellent example of what I try to convey, but there are other examples at different levels. I think to be honest, and as you said, with my background, we have all a tendency to be more comfortable in our own zone, speaking to our own peers, and we know we have the same jargon. But nowadays, maybe the environmental challenges are so big and great that we have to go out of our comfort zone and speak to others, wherever, in our own street, in our own village, somewhere else, at another level.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I also hope that there will be more interest also in the academic teaching community to bring these kind of issues to the students. I think, of course, hard knowledge is number one, but then how can we make a difference, especially in an era where we need to work very hard for a future that we can still transfer to our children and grandchildren? It becomes very important that knowledge can also be used and implemented. So I think teaching could also be an important factor there. And I can only recommend that such kind of courses be developed at all universities, if not already there.
I see Jos, Rob McInnes put a comment rather than the question, but
Right.
I'll just repeat it, that he's basically always asking of every presenter or every scientific research, so what? And I liked in your presentation, Tobias, where you were saying, making sure that it's relevant. And I think that is a challenge for everyone, to make sure that anything you're doing is, how do you make that relevant to wider society or conservation or whatever it is, and really think of that application when you're undertaking your research. But sometimes that's difficult to do in the context of some scientific funding and research, but I think it's always very important.
Yeah, that's already lesson one. So Rob can be a good teacher for this, it seems. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so Rob now actually has a question. I thought he might. So this is to Tobias and to SWS leadership. What can SWS do to make sure that we develop both good scientists and the brokers with the correct skills to ensure that the messages get through to policymakers and wider society? So yeah, it's about capacity building and skills. Yeah.
Okay, hello, Rob. I think there is not the one fits for all solutions. Different amongst us have different interests, different strengths. So everybody can find at his or her end the best niche. Rob is obviously, as a consultant, also very much involved into paid research or analysis. Others are more in the academic field, but even in the most non-relevant, I'm in parentheses, science, there is probably still a relevant piece to be found. And if we can focus on that piece and showing that piece to others, to my aunt, my grandma, or so, to start as a test, if she or her or he understands what I'm trying to say, then maybe also a decision maker, a politician, would understand it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that too. And I think it's also important that scientists can also show the devotion and pleasure they have in their work. And if it's just more than only data or maybe a new theory, but rather also passion that you can put where you can show that sometimes these ideas and new data can make a difference in society. And I think we need to more and more show that also to the young scientists, and that is an important driver for you to keep active the rest of your life.
Fully agree. Passion, showing passion is important. And it's often about species, and species are always good hangers, even if they are very tiny invertebrates, but this is always always to some extent sexy for communication.
Yeah, because indeed, if you explain how they live and what their threats and also their benefits are, that's always very, very interesting. And especially if you have a passion for this group of animals or plants, that helps a lot. Thank you very much.
Rob, would you like to make a comment? Sorry, Rob.
Okay, go ahead. The
Yeah,
last one.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Matt and Tobias and Jos. Yeah, I think
Hello.
the comment I'd like to make is that I think from SWS's perspective, it's a challenge for us. We have very good scientists across a multitude of disciplines all around the wetland science. What we lack is good social science and social scientists who understand the subtleties and the nuances of how you take really good sort of hardcore biochemical, species rated ecological science and turn that into the right messages that really affect change. And I think maybe something we as a society could look at is much more of that bridging the gap between the brokers, getting brokers with the right skills. So we give people science from the technical side of it, but we also then understand what the social scientists need from their communication perspective. Because without that, I think we just run into the situation we find ourselves in where we have some excellent science, but society doesn't listen to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob, for this comment that I totally agree with. I think we should leave it here for the discussion and go to the next lecture, which will be given by Gillian Davies. Gillian is a professor in the BSC Group, a company in the USA, and she is there the senior ecologist. And we have known Gillian for a long time already, being active in SWS. She has been the president of SWS in 2016, and also she has been attending our meeting in Faro in 2017 when we did a new memorandum of cooperation with Ramsar, when the Ramsar secretary was also there. It's a big pleasure for me to introduce you to her. And she has come up with recently with an idea, Rights of Wetlands, a paradigm shift to meet global challenges. In our country, the Netherlands, the legal system has shown to be able to intervene in environmental issues. Think about climate change. The judge has given the government an ultimatum for complying to the goals that they had set themselves. So I think that the legal system has some opportunities to help us. Okay, Gillian, please.
I'm Gillian Davies, and I'm honored to be giving this presentation at the SWS Europe Chapter Annual Meeting. I'd like to thank the organizers for this kind invitation. I would also like to acknowledge that the land from which I'm speaking in Acton, Massachusetts, USA, is on the unceded tribal lands of the Neshoba tribal people, and to acknowledge and express gratitude to the standing people, otherwise known as trees, with whom we all live. In this presentation, I'm going to talk about an innovative idea that represents a paradigm shift in our relationship with wetlands that could realign the ethical and legal framework for that relationship, thereby leading to a significant reduction in the destruction and degradation of wetlands and contributing to achieving a livable climate and stemming the loss and degradation of biodiversity, and also discuss how this idea came about and where it is headed. As you know, wetlands continue on a downward trajectory despite the efforts of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands for the past 50 years and various national and subnational efforts to conserve and protect wetlands. This graph is from WWF's 2020 Living Planet Index. According to the 2020 WWF Freshwater Living Planet Index, almost 1 in 3 freshwater species are threatened with extinction. All freshwater taxonomic groups are at greater risk of extinction than terrestrial taxonomic groups. Greatest threats are for the larger species, the megafauna. According to IPCC, we have just a decade to make major changes in greenhouse gas emissions, while at the same time, IPBES warns us that 1 million species are in imminent danger of extinction. A recent news headline reported that the Arctic is not refreezing for the first time ever. We're at a tipping point. So what's it going to take to prevent catastrophic collapses? Business as usual and existing mechanisms have failed, and we continue to be on a downward trajectory. In fact, world scientists have been warning humanity very explicitly for decades. The 1992 scientists warned, quote, all humanity of what lies ahead. New to the world scientists' warning in 2017 is a timeline. Soon it will be too late to shift away from our failing trajectory. Most of us in the scientific community are beyond worried. These warnings explicitly call upon scientists to speak up about what we know and to develop new approaches. The two articles cited on the slide are useful references in this regard. SWS Wetlands and Climate Change Initiative scientists wrote a wetland-specific response to the world scientists' warnings on how to shift away from our destructive trajectory in the context of wetlands. The article responds to the second warning by identifying wetlands-relevant strategies and actions. As a result of this article, many other discipline-specific papers have been written in similar fashion and can be found on the Alliance of World Scientists website. Efforts of SWS scientists have continued with many papers published, conferences convened, and symposia presented. And all of this is making a difference. And yet, we continue on the downward trajectory. Do you ever feel like we're hanging by a thread? So what's the solution to all of this? What else can we do as wetland scientists? We could respond with a call for a fundamental shift in paradigms for the human-wetland relationship, an ethical and legal shift through recognition of the inherent rights of wetlands based on their membership in the Earth community, and as a wetlands-focused response to the rights of nature movement, which is being recognized by several courts, legislatures, and international governance institutions around the world as a way to restore our relationship with nature. More on that in a moment. This idea for a universal declaration of the rights of wetlands evolved in response to the global crises and the global call for ethical leadership from scientists. As a result of years of collaboration through SWS on climate change and wetlands, an interdisciplinary group led Ramsar and Public Policy and Regulations section symposia and discussions at the SWS 2019 Baltimore annual meeting, back when we could meet in person, where the idea for a universal declaration of the rights of wetlands was introduced and discussed. Following the Baltimore meeting, the group drafted a universal declaration of the rights of wetlands and wrote the recently published open access article titled Towards a Universal Declaration of the Rights of Wetlands, as shown on the slide. As of May 28, 2021, this paper is listed as the second most read paper published in the Marine and Freshwater Research Journal based on number of downloads in the past 60 days from papers published on the Cicero Publishing website within the last 12 months. So it would seem that many people are interested in learning about this approach. This is a map showing the historical and geographical context for the expansion of the circle of rights holders and the recognition of rights of nature. In our research for the article, we found recognition of rights of nature all around the globe and throughout millennia of human history. And our research in this regard does not come close to capturing all examples. As supplementary material with our article, we've provided this world map of the expansion of the circle of rights holders of recognition of rights of nature and a timeline documenting some of the examples through history. The declaration is based on the idea that wetlands are entities entitled to inherent and enduring rights, which derive from their existence as members of the Earth community and should possess legal standing in courts of law. And you can see on the slide the specific rights that were identified. So far, 26 organizations have endorsed the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Wetlands. If you wish to read the declaration, find out more about it, or sign on in support of the declaration, you can visit the website at www.rightsofwetlands.org. We've gotten a lot of positive feedback. The Rights of Wetlands website has a recording in Spanish of Mamo Rosliano, a Colombian indigenous sage, sharing his thoughts on the declaration as he sits on the banks of Lake Tota, the largest lake in Colombia. Marie Toussaint, a member of the European Parliament, is very interested in the declaration, and you can read her thoughts on the website, along with those of several other leaders. The Fundación Montecito submitted the Rights of Wetlands article in a Colombian court case about the rights of Lake Tota, but the judge determined that the case was not being heard in the right court, so it did not proceed. We're in discussion with Ramsar focal points in a number of countries with the hope that one or more will be willing to sponsor a Ramsar draft resolution at the next conference of the parties, which may be held in October of 2022. If you think that rights of wetlands are a worthwhile way to help change the trajectory of wetlands, biodiversity, and our climate, you can help spread the word. In addition to visiting the website and generally sharing information about rights of wetlands, you may be able to start incorporating rights of wetlands into your work. For instance, I'm working with 3 communities in Massachusetts to help them identify, plan, and implement nature-based solutions. The project includes a significant public engagement component, including a website, as you can see on this slide. The community leaders wanted to share information about rights of wetlands, so we incorporated a link to the Rights of Wetlands website on the project website. Members of the SWS Rights of Wetlands Initiative are in the process of establishing a collaboration with the Ecuadorian Sariaku indigenous Quechua people who have a living forest declaration, with the idea that the combined voices of scientists and indigenous people may be stronger than each of us alone in our efforts to reach others about the importance of shifting our relationship with wetlands, forests, and other elements of nature, and changing the continued downward trajectory that business as usual portends. We're planning a series of online meetings and interactions with the Sariaku and other indigenous leaders to find common ground between scientists and traditional knowledge holders on behalf of the protection of wetlands, forests, and other ecosystems, and the recognition of their living beingness and rights. I want to acknowledge that my comments are those of a non-Indigenous person, and I don't want to speak for Indigenous people, but rather am reflecting on what I've learned from some of them. Recognition of the living beingness and personhood of elements of nature is often a central element of Indigenous culture. Robin Wall Kimmerer explains in her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, that Potawatomi language grants animacy to nature, including whole ecosystems, thus acknowledging a reciprocal relationship and rights. In contrast, English only grants animacy to humans and thus distances us from other forms of life and distance us from moral and legal obligation to other organisms and ecosystems. Where we might say to someone who's stressed out, go for a walk in the woods, Potawatomi elders would advise, go among the standing people, which implies a fundamentally different relationship, one among equals, one where the walker has something to learn from the standing people, and where an active relationship with mutual giving and taking is implied on a par with human-to-human relationships. Deriving in part from the wisdom of Indigenous peoples, and in part from a Western history of advocating for the rights of nature, such as the voices of Henry David Thoreau, John Muir, Christopher Stone, Roderick Nash, and Thomas Berry, the emerging rights of nature movement reflects values long held by humans of many cultures around the world. In 2001, Thomas Berry authored a Declaration of the Rights of Nature titled The Origin, Differentiation, and Role of Rights, in which he addresses the innate rights of both humans and nature, recognizing the subjectivity of all components of the universe, rather than reserving subjectivity strictly to one species. He outlines 3 basic rights that all living and non-living components of the Earth community have. The right to be, the right to habitat or a place to be, and the right to fulfill its role in the ever-renewing processes of the Earth community. A particularly significant accomplishment in the recognition of rights of nature occurred with the passing of the Te Awa Tupua Act, or the Wanganui River Claims Settlement Act, in March of 2017, where the New Zealand Parliament granted the Wanganui River, including wetlands, the legal rights of personhood, and legally recognized the special relationship between the Maori iwi, iwi meaning tribes, and the river. As a legal person, the river has the same rights and responsibilities as a human person, similar to how New Zealand law recognizes the personhood rights and responsibilities of companies, trusts, and societies. The Wanganui iwi have been advocating for legal recognition of the river's rights and their relationship to it since the 1870s. It's believed that the Wanganui River is the first river in the world to be granted the rights of personhood. We can see several other examples around the world of the growing recognition of the rights of nature. For instance, in 2010, the Universal Declaration of the Rights of Mother Earth was issued at the World People's Conference on Climate Change and the Rights of Mother Earth in Cochabamba, Bolivia. The Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, as well as other NGOs, works to promote rights of nature around the world. This declaration acknowledges that, quote, the idea of Earth as a living entity and humanity as part of the whole is a core component of indigenous cultures and has been accepted widely in Western society. In terms of wetlands, in addition to the various specific rivers and lakes inclusive of their wetlands that have been granted rights, there now exists a Universal Declaration of River Rights developed by the Earth Law Center, which addresses the rights of riparian wetlands and their watersheds, but not of many other types of wetlands. This slide outlines some of the main provisions of the Universal Declaration of River Rights. The earliest recent example of nature obtaining legal rights occurred in 2006 when the Tamaqua Borough from Philadelphia in Appalachian Coal Country, Pennsylvania, USA, working with the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund, codified the rights of nature. Appropriately, Tamaqua is a Native American word meaning either running water or land of the beaver. In 2008, the Ecuadorian government rewrote their constitution to include the rights of nature. One of the constitutional provisions granting rights to nature is shown on the slide. The Indian Uttarakhand High Court granted the rights of personhood to the river Ganges. However, the Indian Supreme Court stayed the decision due to ambiguity concerning accountability. Colombian courts have recognized the legal rights and personhood of the Atrato River and the entire Amazon River basin. Interestingly, recent ecological research is learning that nature is more complex and perhaps more sentient than Western science has previously understood. This evolving scientific understanding of the planet's living beings and their relationships, while using different language, begins to reflect an understanding similar to the understanding of the living beingness and personhood of nature that many indigenous cultures have had for millennia. The idea of nature, both as whole ecosystems and as individual beings within those systems, has inherent and inalienable rights, animacy, and subjectivity may seem unfamiliar, or it may seem like something that we have known all along, but have been unaware of due to cultural and linguistic biases. If we look at human history, we see that societies that have recognized the rights and subjectivity of nature often have found greater balance and sustainable use of nature's gifts when compared to those that hold the view of nature as object, whether we are managing nature or out and out exploiting nature. And therefore, the rights of nature approach may play a crucial role in our ability to respond effectively to the global crises we face. As Robin Wall Kimmerer said, it's all in the pronouns. If a maple is an it, we can take up the chainsaw. If a maple is a her, we think twice. The Western paradigm got us into the wetlands, climate, and biodiversity crises. What have we been missing? Would reconsidering our language and our ethical framework, which are the underpinnings of our legal system, help us find better solutions? perhaps solutions that have to do with recognizing the living beingness of nature and our role and responsibilities as members of the web of life rather than as natural resource extractors. And finally, I hope that you are able to find time to read our article that provides a more detailed rationale and context for the proposed Universal Declaration of the Rights of Wetlands. And please seek out any of our group of co-authors to discuss this proposed idea further. I hope you all have a chance to walk among the standing people sometime this week. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Gillian. And also thank you for being here with us now for entertaining questions too. And maybe
Well,
a thank you. Yes.
Oh, I was just going to say thank you, Jos. It's an honor to be here.
Well, in general, I would like to thank quite some American participants who are with us today here. I really enjoy your interest very much. Thank you for that. And maybe I cannot imagine that there will be no discussion with your inspiring lecture. I think it is such an interesting idea. Of course, we are very much used to human rights now, and I already indicated that human rights are the basis for judges in our country, the Netherlands, to take the government to court, and now also Shell, the oil company, successfully. So there's definitely something changing here, because first, all legal people would say, no, this is not something that a court could really address. You know, we are not really for this, not the right body for this. So I would like to ask whether there is someone in the audience who wants to ask questions or has comments on your excellent lecture.
And I wanted to thank Matt Simpson for all of his work on rights of wetlands. And anybody who wants to talk to Matt later on or whatever, he's been really crucial in all of our efforts, and a co-author on some subsequent papers that have come out. We've written several more. So I just wanted to acknowledge his contributions, which are substantial.
Very kind, Gillian. But I would definitely encourage people to head to the website. I'll put it in the chat in a minute if you didn't catch it, and sign up to the declaration if you would so want to. I have a question, Gillian, whilst we wait for others to get in, and I know it's one that's come up before, but how do you see the relationship between the human rights and the rights of nature, and how that works?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I think a good way to understand that is that we humans are part of nature. So it's moving away from the Western dualistic thinking of nature over there and humans over here. And there will need to, as we work through how to operationalize rights of wetlands and rights of nature, there may be times where there is a conflict between a human right and a right of a wetland or other element of nature, but that's also the case with rights between two different humans or two different human groups, and we work those conflicts out over time, and sometimes they go to court to be worked out. So I would see it as evolving as we evolve our understanding of what rights of nature means, and not a whole lot more difficult than working out the different people's rights and when they come into conflict with each other. So.
Thank you. And different organizational rights, as you said in your presentation. Yeah. You know, in many legal systems, organizations, companies have, you know, legal personhood rights. So it's exactly the same system.
Right, exactly. We already have a model for this in terms of corporations having legal rights. And if completely non-living corporations have rights, why shouldn't living nature have rights? And also, when we did the research for the paper, what's so fascinating is this idea of recognizing the living beingness and rights of nature goes way, way, way back in our Western legal system. All the Romans recognized rights of nature. They had sort of a legal rights of nature thread to their legal system, and also how universal it is globally to recognize rights of nature and living beingness of nature throughout the world. All different cultures, you can find elements of this.
Okay, I see, Jos, that our treasurer, Matt Cochran, has his hand up to ask a question.
Okay, go ahead, Matt.
Yes, hello, Gillian. Very nice presentation. Nice, very nice to hear that. Yeah, obviously I live in Europe and abide by the Danish laws here in Denmark when it regards to streams and wetlands. But being an American, I have a background of Section 404 and U.S. Army Corps of Engineer and everything over there with permitting. And I'm curious, what is the difference, or what would be the difference between the laws that are already in place, based obviously upon the U.S. laws, but what would be the difference between the laws and getting this legislation approved, or however you want to put it? What is the outcome? What would be the difference in the end?
I think there would be a different legal structure if we look at how rights of nature are being codified around the world. For instance, in New Zealand with the Wanganui River, the structure is that the river and its wetlands and environment has inherent rights, and because it cannot represent itself in court, similar to how a child cannot represent itself in court, it has representatives. So, and the way they've set it up is there's a representative from the Maori iwi and a representative from the government, and together they make decisions and on behalf of the river and the river's wetlands. And those decisions are rooted in the river's rights, and also in that case the Maori rights to their special relationship with the river. So it's kind of in that case study, it's an integrated way of supporting indigenous rights as well as the rights of the wetland itself. And I think that how that would be different from existing Clean Water Act Section 404 regulations. And for those who are unfamiliar with the US regulatory system, Section 404 is the specific section of the regulations that protects wetlands. And I think the difference is that if the wetlands have an inherent rights, just like people, the legislation could be stronger. What we've seen, sadly, in the US is that all it took to unravel much of the existing 404 regulations was one president and his administration. They've largely gutted our Clean Water Act, or a lot of the Clean Water Act regulations, and half or less of the wetlands that had been protected by that regulation are no longer protected in the US now. And the Biden administration is working hard to reverse that and go back to a science-based model of protecting wetlands, but it's very vulnerable, as it turns out. And I think if you root something in inherent rights, legally that could be a lot stronger. And the other difference is that it's an educational tool. It's a way of shifting people's mindsets and shifting our ethical framework. And I think we need to do that because all the existing approaches they've done some good. Things would be much worse if we didn't have them. And yet we're still on a really steep downward trajectory with wetland loss, with climate change, with biodiversity loss and degradation. So we need to change something. And one of the things we need to change is people's mindsets and their ethical relationship with the land. And so I think those would be some of the differences.
Okay, thank you very much, Gillian. I see another question, but I don't know whether we have the time to tackle another issue. It is from Kim Ponzio, and it's about how climate change disproportionately affects certain people groups and how the right of wetlands approach could impact or improve our recognition of this fact. Well, if you can give a very brief answer, we can just do it now. Otherwise, we have to pass it over for.
Yeah, sure. Very briefly, I think the rights of wetlands and rights of nature works very well with supporting Indigenous peoples' rights, for instance, and they live on a disproportionately large percent of land that has not been developed. And so that's one way. And the other way is the more that we are successful in protecting wetlands and other important ecosystems, the less impact climate change will have on the most vulnerable, who are going to feel the biggest impact.
Okay, thank you very much for now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we conclude then the keynote lectures now, and we go to the contributed lectures. And I'm asking Matt to start the first one, which will be given by Stijn Den Haan, who is now working at Lund University. And I heard before this meeting that he is also graduating today, later this afternoon. So, okay, Stijn, go ahead. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Stijn Den Haan, and I would like to talk to you about wetland restoration. Why is that, you may ask? Well, let me demonstrate. These blue squares represent all the European wetlands that we had in the year 1900. However, today, we only have 1/3 of those left. We have deteriorated 2/3 of these wetlands. And because other wetlands and other ecosystems around the world are deteriorating as well, the United Nations has declared a decade on ecosystem restoration. It started just 2 weeks ago. Now, if we want to restore these wetlands, for example, our European wetlands, one obvious question is, well, how do we do so? And there are many aspects to this. There is understanding the ecology and other natural sciences. There is understanding the legal framework, understanding the financial aspects. But one particular barrier to restoration that keeps coming back in expert surveys and literature in general, that is to successfully engage the community, to engage people, to collaborate with people and get their support, people that are relevant to these ecosystems, that have a stake in it somehow. Say farmers, say people who use it for recreation, local government, state enterprises. There are lots of different people that are involved and affected by any decisions that you may make or any restoration activities that you may undertake. So as a result, it's very important to engage the local community to make sure you have their support, and that's what it's all about. So, because this may sound like a fully new thing that you may never have heard of, I would like to make you a promise. I would like to promise you two things. First, I would like to promise that at the end of this talk, you'll understand the main community engagement strategies that have been used in European wetland restoration projects. And secondly, I would like to, at the end of this talk, you'll understand the perspective of wetland restoration practitioners as well in what they think is most important like a most important community engagement strategy to ensure the long-lasting success of these restoration projects, to really ensure that you've restored an ecosystem and it stays that way for the long term. So, what's been my approach is actually to learn from successful projects. It's very basic. Okay, so my methodology is a little bit different than you may be familiar with, because rather than using quantitative analyses and all those kind of things, I used a qualitative analysis. I interviewed 9 different EU LIFE projects and their project managers to understand how they engage communities and to also see their perspective on the matter. So after I've transcribed these interviews, I used a framework on community engagement that I found in the literature, and then which has a number of different strategies in it. And then I looked, okay, so in these projects, do they use like similar things, or like which kind of strategies do they use? And then subsequently, I mapped all those different strategies and put it all together. So, first question, what community engagement strategies have been used in these EU Life projects? So there are 6 different things to this. There are 6 different components or dimensions to community engagement strategies in EU Life projects. It's to connect with the local communities, it's to empower them, it's to learn from and teach to the local communities, it's to integrate your project in the local community, it's to demonstrate the success and failure, but it's also to persist and to stay present in the local community after the project has finished. So let's delve into these a little bit more specifically. So to connect is all about building local networks and partnerships, to engage with, to build a coalition, for example, with the local government. One thing that a Spanish EU Life project mentioned is that, yes, the first step that they do is to connect with the local government to ask for their permission, their advice, but also for their connections, because they interact with the farmers within the municipality on a day-to-day basis. And then they have a lot of information that can help you to scope your restoration project. It's also important to have visible leadership, to be really present there, to not be, rather than being an outsider, you really have to be, to integrate yourself as well by being visible, by early and broad involvement of the community and its stakeholders. So rather than saying, hey, we've restored an ecosystem, what do you think of it? Instead, you start right from the planning phase to incorporate all the people, all the local stakeholders. And then lastly, it's to build personal relationships as well. The Lithuanian project, for example, described how they just knocked on farmers' doors, asked for their opinion, and then said, well, how can we work together to restore these the rare European songbird population? Okay, let's move on to the next one, to empower, because that's another important part of this framework. So empowering is all about having structures and representation, structures for representation and participation, to just have a way in which local community members can have their say and can have their voice heard, and also participate, for example, through volunteer groups. It's another important thing is to create a common vision, to ensure that all the people that are engaged, that they have like a common idea of what it should look like, the restored ecosystem. You have to manage the power dynamics, because some stakeholders may have a stronger influence on the outcome than others. And allowing for bottom-up initiatives is a very useful way of doing things, as well as demonstrated by a Finnish restoration project. So then it's important as well to learn and to teach, to learn from the local government, yes, and also other stakeholders, to exchange, like, for example, local ecological knowledge with scientific knowledge, but to also understand their local context, their history, what they are used to, what they have had in the past regarding, for example, restoration activities, but also to build capacity. For example, to teach farmers, for example, in Spain, to teach organic methods for production that can help the restoration of the wetlands in the long term. Okay, then fourth, it's important to integrate your project and its effects also in the local community. So, for example, it's important to create locally relevant benefits. Now, what do I mean with that? Well, for example, if the local community is very much into, say, building an ecotourism business, then as a result, it can be very useful if you restore the ecosystem and create, for example, walkways and bird watching towers and those kind of things that subsequently the local community can benefit from and build upon, so that the well-being of the locals is also related to the well-being of the ecosystem. When the ecosystem is healthy, we have lots of tourists, and then you can also have some sustainable development. It's also useful to organize locally relevant events, such as canoe races that have been used in several different projects. Okay, and then it's important also to demonstrate the success and the failure, to demonstrate, for example, in Hungary, where people showed that suddenly, rather than having barely any waterfowl, now there are thousands or 10,000s of waterfowl that migrate and that spend time in this wetland right next to a small village, and they never used to be there. And then to also show to the locals, well, this is, for example, the result of the restoration project, and that helps to build their support as well. Using one particular focal species has helped as well, for example, a Lithuanian project that focused on this rare European songbird. So, lastly, it's important to persist in the local community, to have successor projects, that it doesn't just stop. That, for example, you as practitioner, you don't just leave the local community and let them be, but rather you start additional projects that also help the local community as well as the surrounding wetlands. And committing to long-term collaboration is one thing that people use that helps to build trust. So all in all, these are the different strategies that have been used. And now you may think, well, so which one, Stein, is the most important then? Because there are so many. So that's what I asked the practitioners as well. And they said, well, it's these different ones, the ones in bold. So it's to build local networks and partnerships, it's to build personal relationships, structures for representation and participation, bottom-up initiatives, communicating success and failure, and also to create locally relevant benefits. And this one was particularly important. At least it was mentioned by at least 5 different restoration practitioners. That when you integrate the well-being of the ecosystem and the well-being of the people, that's when you really start to make a resilient ecosystem. All right, so in conclusion, it's important to do 6 different things. It's to connect with the local communities, to empower them, to learn and to teach, to integrate your project, to demonstrate success and failure, and to persist in the local community. And it's important then as well to create locally relevant benefits. All right, at least according to the restoration practitioners. Okay, so all in all, thank you very much for your attention. And in the big picture, I hope that this contributes to supporting the restoration of European wetlands. If you have any questions, I'm eager to answer them. Thank you.
Hello, thank you for attending to this presentation, where I'm going to talk about the use of remote sensing images and algorithms for classification. This study, Machine Learning Classification and Accuracy Assessment from High-Resolution Images of Coastal Wetlands, has been developed by researchers at Estonian University of Life Science and the University of Brighton. We know that we can monitor environmental changes and evaluate ecological conditions using remote sensing imagery. We detect vegetation structure in form of plant communities, but depending on the type of these communities, spatial resolution from satellites might not be enough to capture the heterogeneity. This can be the case of coastal grasslands. We can increase the spatial resolution by using high-resolution images taken from cameras on board of unmanned aerial vehicles. They present many advantages for environmental studies. To distinguish plant communities, we use a supervised classification of images where the training dataset is the georeference samples collected from field. These are the categories or ground truth. Then a machine learning classification algorithm uses both datasets to produce a map of categories. We apply the classification to pixel values and object values. So what are the objects? These are a group of homogeneous pixels according to their values and geographic characteristics, sharing similar spatial qualities. From 2001, more and more studies were using the new paradigm of classifying images at object level because it was shown to be more efficient in high-resolution images. Then our objectives are to classify plant communities in coastal wetlands using 2 different machine learning algorithms from high-resolution UAV images, to compare the classification accuracies of pixels and objects, and to perform a quality assessment between each classification map. We labeled our plots following the categories proposed by Burnside et al. According to dominant species in them. We georeference the plots on the images so they contain the purest pixels of plant communities. We replicated this method in 6 study areas, as seen in this map. The study areas are located on the west coast of Estonia within 3 different protected areas. 2 different cameras were used. First, Parasequoia multispectral camera on board of the EB+ fixed-wing UAV and the SenseFly SODA to extract photogrammetric points to generate a digital elevation model with a millimetric accuracy. This high accuracy was needed because we know that that microtopography is one of the environmental factors that influences the distribution of plant communities in coastal wetlands. Then we calculated 10 vegetation indices from 4 different bands by using map algebra. The values of indices and the digital elevation model were the variables to classify the pixels. We used the R script with the package caret. In here, we did not use the digital elevation model and vegetation indices for a classification, but for a segmentation of images. This means that we divided the image in recognizable objects according to the reference samples. The divisions are called segments and they constitute the objects which are going to be classified. For this purpose, we use the SegOptim package in R. Instead of selecting the best segments visually after the segmentation, we apply the genetic algorithm. This algorithm is based on maximum and minimum values to look for the best fitness function, which will perform an accurate classification after iterating several times. The reason of choosing these 2 machine learning algorithms are the following, but mainly because they deal with complex and non-parametric data. Although there is not a better algorithm than other in remote sensing, these are widely used for environmental purposes. As in here, we apply random forest and KNN to object and pixel classification. The overall accuracy score and kappa statistic were used to assess the classification. For map comparisons, we calculated the disagreement areas. This area is the area with different categories detected in each classifier, and it is composed by allocation disagreement or displacement of categories and quantity disagreement or amount of categories that have changed. The chance agreement is the remaining percentage not due to the aforementioned metrics. Here, we can see that the accuracies reached by classifiers were actually high. We can highlight 2 points. On average, random forest performs better than KNN in pixels and objects. On the other hand, there are not many differences between classification of pixels and objects. The comparisons show that random forest classifying objects as pixels have more areas in common or less disagreement than seen in the comparison of random forest and KNN both in pixels and objects. Then they do not classify in the same way in spite of having similar accuracies. The highest disagreement is reached by random forest and KNN classifiers with pixels. In general, there was a high accuracy with the machine learning classifiers in coastal wetlands, so we should use them to perform a classification. Random forest performs better than KNN, but in addition to accuracies, we should see the map of categories because we can interpret them from an ecological point of view. In this example of Matsalu area, we can see that there is a clear stratification from random forest, and actually this is how the field looks like. There is a strong influence of microtopography, and actually the random forest algorithms show a high importance of digital elevation model to classify the plant communities. The KNN, as we can see in the right, mixes the pixels more frequently. The disagreement areas between random forest and KNN corresponds to ecotones, as you know, transition between plant communities. Then we can say that KNN does not classify properly in these areas. Random forests show a better classification as we observe in the field. From these results, we found some interesting points to discuss. As said in the introduction, classification of objects is considered as a better approach in high-resolution images, but in this case, contrary to what researchers say, we got almost the same results, but slightly worse. Classification of objects retrieves slightly worse results than pixels, perhaps due to the loss of heterogeneity because of grouping pixels in homogeneous areas. Then we can conclude that the use of two robust machine learning algorithms to classify pixels and objects from high-resolution images classify plant communities with a high accuracy, provide better results with the classification of pixels, but in all cases, random forest classifies better than KNN, and retrieve lower scores of disagreement between areas and categories comparing the use of random forest and the classification of pixels and objects, although this also depends on the structure of plant communities in each study area. Finally, we would like to thank the Doctoral School of Earth Science and Ecology, financed by the European Union. These are our references, and this is the contact. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ricardo, for this interesting talk. We do have we are a few minutes ahead of schedule at the moment. Matt Simpson, can we entertain some questions now, or do you want to just go on with the next presentation and then save the questions for the break?
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind. It is up to you, Jos. You're chairing, so you can make the decision.
Yeah, maybe because people are counting on the schedule, maybe we can just have some discussion on the previous two talks already. And I would like to encourage everybody to participate in the discussions through the chat or by just raising your hand and asking questions. Are there any discussion points?
I have a question for Ricardo. Probably people were waiting to ask in a few minutes.
Go ahead.
So Ricardo's, your work is very interesting. Thank you very much for the presentation. In terms of what do you see the implications of the tool that's being developed in terms of management of those wetland habitats, in terms of mapping products and how that then will inform management in the future?
Well, the thing is that we have detailed data from high-resolution images, and if we have another classifier, an accurate classifier, we could track along, through the time, the land use changes, because the final products of remote sensing images, wherever they come, land use changes, mainly for us ecologists. So in that way, we can track if, of course, the ecosystem is decreasing, the area is decreasing, the health, let's say, because we have used the vegetation indices. So that's an approach
to the ecosystem health, monitoring the vegetation, the plant communities. So, for example, if we keep tracking with UAV images, we can have a time lapse of the status, and of course, well, for a future approach, actually, we pretend to we would like to upscale to satellite images, for instance, and then we will have a more temporal window. For example, from 2016 using Sentinel-2, or well, even before. But well, that's another tricky question if we want to use Landsat, which is coarser resolution. But well, the main advantage is here, as I told in the presentation, are the high resolution. So yeah, in general, we can track in more detail the evolution of these areas, and of course, using images from above, we cannot leave the field work. We cannot stop doing that. Of course, we need real data and to compare with the images, and we have to see the images are truth. So, but we can. It's not necessary to well, we can let's say use this data for the whole area. Then we can monitor a larger area.
Thank you. Yeah, I think interesting to see maybe hydrological changes in the future because of climate change and things and the impact that then has. But it's great to have that record to allow you to do that. Yeah.
Absolutely, and this will affect the plant communities, of course.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the talk once more. And now we move from Matsalu, Estonia, beautiful area, I've been there, to Tunisia, where there's another coastal wetland area which has been studied by remote sensing, the Kerkennah Archipelago, and Cyrine Suissi will give a talk about that.
I'm Cyrine Suissi, PhD student enrolled at the High Agronomic Institute of Chat Mariam University of South Tunisia. Today I'm going to present a research work prepared with Mrs. Balqis Shaban and Mrs. Faiza Khabour entitled Contribution of Remote Sensing to an Overview of the Heritage Coastal System of Ramsar Site, Case of the Kerkennah Archipelago. The plan of the presentation is a logical follow-on to a common research work. We will start with an introduction, presenting the study area, which is the Kerkennah Archipelago, the methodology, results, discussion, and conclusion. In 1996, UCN initiated a project that focuses on wetlands and marine sites, including island systems in the World Heritage List, to offer a broader view of protection and management. As wetlands and marine areas are among the most productive natural environments on Earth. Knowing that Ramsar incorporates into its consideration for listing riparian and coastal zones adjacent to the wetlands, we took as a study case the Kerkennah Archipelago located in the South Mediterranean shore, attached to Sfax Governorate, Tunisia. Kerkennah Islands are listed as a Ramsar site in 2012. Since the Sibkha occupies 1/3 of its territory, which characterized with low topography, generally between 0 and 2 meters above sea level. The Palm Grove is registered as an intangible World Heritage of UNESCO in 2019, since Tunisia took part in this Arab initiative. And the Sharfia, specific fishing technique to the Kerkennah Archipelago, is registered as an intangible World Heritage of UNESCO in 2020. However, there is a continuous extension of the salt flies at the expanse of the Palm Grove, whose trees are dying in hundreds. The extension of the Sibkha and salinization are the major environmental problems of the archipelago. The studies mentioned have looked at the Sibkha characteristics separately as a threat to the archipelago, but did not investigate the potential of combining the adjacent goods. To prevent further loss and implement policies for preservation, we are presenting a reflection for a large-scale monitoring and integration of adjacent goods. Remote sensing has been an efficient adopted method for land cover monitoring. It is considered as the most useful tool to acquire spatial and temporal information about wetlands, offering a great potential to support cost-effective and large-scale monitoring of wetlands. The Sentinel-1 and 2 satellite missions for the first time provide radar and optical data at high spatial and temporal detail, and with this, a unique opportunity for more accurate wetland mapping from space arises. Therefore, we studied a Sentinel-2 image recorded in the 1st of March 2020, available via Copernicus, in order to delimit the areas occupied by the Sibkha and the Palm Grove. Then emphasis was placed on the village of Melita to locate the Sharfia, which was digitalized from a Google Earth image, also thanks to a good knowledge of the field. The treatments were carried out from spectral bands 4 and 8 with 10-meter resolution and 11 with 20-meter resolution to calculate three indices: the normalized difference vegetation index that provides information on the density of plant cover and the quantity of green biomass using band 8 and band 4, the normalized difference water index used for remote sensing of vegetation liquid water that uses band 8 and band 11, and the brightness index that is sensitive to the soil glow related to its humidity and the presence of salt. It uses band 4 and band 8. The results obtained from the calculations of the superposition of indices show two main land use classes. The Sibkha is represented by the weakly and medium and strongly hydromorphic soil, and the Palm Grove represented by the halophyte plants, the palm trees, and the cultivated space, knowing that there are two types of palm grove in Kerkena, the one associated with cultivated space used for agrarian purposes, and the natural palm grove associated with halophyte plants. The second map highlights the connection between the Sibkha, Palm Grove, and Sharfia as a coastal system representing a frequency of goods with cultural and natural heritage values. As we see in these two pictures taken in the coast of Kerkena Islands, the Palm Grove is directly connected to the Sibkha, as well as the Sharfia seen from the continent. So these three goods represent the important elements that define the landscape of the archipelago and provide substantial socio-economic benefits to the local population. In fact, the Sharfia is a traditional fishing technique that constitutes the economic pillar of the archipelago and contributes to a resilient ecosystem by preserving the fields of Posidonia, unlike modern fishing techniques. The Palm Grove is the raw material of the Sharfia and many other supplies. The Sibkha is the engine of well hydrofunction on the archipelago and the sustainability of the Palm Grove. In fact, the originality of the coastal Sibkhas of Kerkena is that they are the depressions open to the sea, following a very slight slope. They transport excess water to the sea, leaching chlorides. This hydrological functioning maintains low salt concentration, a particularity at the origin of the Palm Grove genesis in direct contact with the Sibkha. However, the anthropogenic factors caused the breaking of this very fragile balance. To conclude, nature-based solutions are mandatory to the sustainable management of the coastal system in the Kerkena archipelago. The integrated valorization of this coastal system helps building a resilient ecosystem since these goods are structurally and functionally interconnected. The degradation of one contributes to the degradation of the other and vice versa. The contribution of remote sensing made it possible to visualize the coastal heritage system of the Kerkena archipelago. However, despite its usefulness, the value of the system depends mainly on the perception of the local population. For this reason, social surveys remain essential for a more reliable study. As part of PhD program that I'm enrolled in, we plan to carry on studies in this field, doing field surveys and compare them with the cartography results. Thank you for your attention.
For some time again, and we have now till 4:15 for discussions. So let's just enjoy more interaction, and maybe to ask you first, you are talking about palm groves on these islands. Are these the most valuable parts of the wetlands in terms of local population use? Eline?
Hello.
Yes.
Yes, I actually carried out a research project as part of my master thesis previously about the heritage value of the palm grove. And it was proven that the local population admits this value and considered the palm grove as the main cultural landscape of the archipelago.
And what kind of uses, can you more specifically indicate what they use the palms for? Is that mainly for the seeds, or is it for shade, or is it for wood? So what uses can you indicate?
Actually, the palm grove has many daily uses in the Kerkennah archipelago. We already mentioned the sharfia, which is the economic pillar. They also use it for building as a roof. For summer houses on the beach, they use it for making hats, bags, etc. So it's actually at the origin of many know-how with very high heritage values.
That's very interesting. And is there any protection for these islands? Is there a threat, or can you indicate that?
Yes, actually, the archipelago is threatened mainly by the extension of the Sabkha, as now they are constructing roads, they are extracting the soil for buildings. So this balance between Sabkha and palm grove is threatened. And now we see the extension of the Sabkha on the palm grove.
Okay. And do you think that there are initiatives maybe to conserve more of the area? Would that be an opportunity? And how is that organized, if so?
Yes, many associations are now calling for initiatives for preservation. And we have in Tunisia many research projects also studying the area for these purposes, including my dissertation.
Okay. Very interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So Jos, Kim,
yes.
as we are talking to Serene, Kim has asked if Serene could explain in more detail what the Sharifa and the Sabkha are. So give us some indication of the characteristics.
Okay, in fact, the Sharfia is a fishing technique, traditional fishing technique. Actually, it's we use palms to construct the Sharfia in the sea. I'm sorry for the noise. We are using palms to construct the Sharfia in the sea. They have actually a specific geometry to capture fishes. This technique contributes to fix the soil and also to preserve the fields of Posidonia, as modern fishing techniques take off the Posidonia, which has an important ecological role in Kerkennah archipelago. For the Sabkha, it's salt playas, depressions with 0 and 2 meters elevation above sea level.
Okay, thank you. I hope that is clearer for Kim now. Thank you very much, Sunny. And Jos, there was a question for Ricardo. I think he's answered a few in the Q&A. But Ricardo, could you tell us what programs you use to do your classification, please?
Yeah. Yeah, I have answered it. Well, but I can do it live, of course. I have used R package mainly you know that it has different libraries. So there is, well, for classification, the pixel-based classification, I use Caret, the Caret package. For classification of objects, I've used the Segoptim package, which is a completely new package developed by Joao Gonçalves. And yeah, well, if you want me to put a link to this package on public, so you can use it and configure it, is quite useful. So it's and of course you know that object-based classification is used more and more in remote sensing. Well, actually, we've seen that object is not so comparable to pixels in coastal wetlands, but if you find another type of vegetation which is suitable for objects, you can use it, of course. We did not use, for example, eCognition or ArcMap. We just use open software. And of course, for processing the images, raster, ArcGIS, all which all that our package offers.
Okay, thank you. I think I have a question for our first presenter, if that's okay. I thought it was really interesting about community engagement, and it linked very nicely to our earlier presentations. So thank you for that. I noticed that when you asked people what they thought were the most important characteristics, that the learn and teach and the persist ones didn't come out. And in my experience, to have really successful community engagement, that persist one is crucial, because you have to build up trust over a long time. You know, if you're just doing, I don't know, a 2 or 3 year funded project and then disappear and then maybe come back again in 5 or 6 years, then you've got to start again. So that, you know, those are really key elements, and it allows you to do that connection, I think, with the community. And, you know, that then you have the things like personal relationships or whatever, but I've always felt anyway that you have to be with a community for 10 or 15 years to make real change and get real progress. So yeah, I wondered whether you could comment on that and why you think people didn't. I mean, I really get that it has to be a local solution. That's very important. But that kind of persistence thing, why people didn't, think that was so important, I guess.
That's a great question, Matt. Thank you very much. Of course, like what I explored was just the perspective of these restoration practitioners. And of course, like I would have had a very different perspective, or probably very different results, if I had talked also to local community members and to really get their perspective as well, because they experience things completely differently. Though I focused on these restoration practitioners because I have a more, sort of helicopter overview of these projects and from start to finish. But maybe to some extent, they did not think this was most important, because it was, well, for some projects, I know it was very, how would you call this in English? It was very easy to, like, it doesn't require any thinking to do so. For example, to start new successor projects. For instance, when I was talking to a Spanish restoration practitioner, we're talking about lots of different things. And at some point he said, oh yeah, of course. Like, we have this land stewardship scheme, which is super, for him, it's like the most common thing to use in the world. But when talking to me, he thought, oh yeah, that's of course like not so common maybe outside of Spain. And then he said, it's really the cornerstone to make sure that these projects last in the long term. And that they, and for example, this particular NGO also, it has its a mission of really investing in the local community rather than just doing a project. That their main goal is to make sure that they invest continuously in the community, getting more funding, and then really rather than doing just a tiny bit of an improvement in a small area, to really broaden that out and to show also then the results in the adjacent communities and say, hey, look, we've restored these ecosystems. The organic farming is something they link to the restoration as well. The organic farming is taking lift off. It's very beneficial to the locals, and hence you can demonstrate the positive benefits of restoration. So I'm not properly answering your question, Matt, I think, because it's difficult to say why they didn't pick, like, say, exchanging knowledge or like exchanging local ecological knowledge and raising awareness through scientific knowledge, or starting successor projects. So maybe it's just because it's such a common thing for them to do, or to adapt to the local context.
No, it's interesting, and I like your first comment saying, you know, that obviously you were talking to the practitioners rather than the community, because it would be really interesting to show that contrast, I think, in terms of what the community feel is the best way to engage with them. So, so thank you for that. We have another question for you, if that's all right.
Oh yes, absolutely.
Okay, this is from Rob McInnes. You identified the need to demonstrate benefits to local communities in order to achieve successful wetland restoration. Were these benefits the local communities identified and defined themselves, or were they possible benefits explained to them by the project proponents?
I would say it will be a combination of both, because sometimes when a restoration project has been completed, like, you still need to be able to actively show the impact, for example, of restoration. One particular project I look at was resulted in the strong recovery of particular fish species, and showing that they migrated. In this case, they migrated through a particular river, showing, for example, then to the locals, bringing them to the hatcheries that were present in the rivers. Only then the click was made for the locals, saying, "Oh, all right, so like this is the real impact of restoration, rather than having a river that was basically dead." Now there are like thousands or hundreds of thousands of fish migrating through every spring or every summer. For them, yes, in that case, it had to be shown. On the other hand, if you ensure that you have a common vision for, well, what should the restoration impact be, then you can also make sure that, yes, as a result of restoration, that you indeed meet the needs of the local communities. Because in the end, yes, if you restore something and people are like, well, that's not super interesting for me, or like these benefits sorry, I'm just closing a window. But these benefits, they can be monetary, and sometimes people are more interested in that. Sometimes they can be just cultural or recreational. Or in Finland, they were restoring wetlands not for any monetary gain, but just because restoring wetlands led to an increase in waterfowl populations. And because I think half of all privately owned land in Finland is owned by hunters, and increasing waterfowl increases hunting opportunities, that was their main reason. So if you make it locally relevant, then these benefits, which can be economic or non-economic, or like tangible or intangible, that's very much dependent on the local context. But sometimes you have to show it, and sometimes you have to make sure that it's really integrated into the project planning.
Yeah, I think that's the key point from my view, is designing the project with local communities, which is hard if you haven't got funding for that. But before you even get to the project, designing it with them. But Rob wanted to make another comment, so I'll let him speak himself now. So.
Yeah, thanks, Matt, and thanks, Dean. It was a very interesting presentation. I suppose it's a bit of a concern of mine often, where I get to go visit wetland restoration projects, and I always feel that an overriding sense of opportunity missed. And quite often that's because the project has been driven by a very narrow set of objectives, and people haven't gone that extra mile, either from the project proponent point of view and actually trying to think outside of the box and saying, well, hang on, what are the multiple benefits that we could implement here and we could achieve? and then also engaging with the local community to understand what's important to them. And I think it's something which, as wetland professionals, we need to get better at, because until we can make that really strong connection between the benefits that wetland provides human society, we're really going to struggle to overcome the wetland loss scenario that you painted for Europe. And I think quite often we've almost ended up with a dichotomy where it's about nature conservation, or what some people class as nature conservation, and the opportunities to then deliver multiple benefits to society get lost because they become subservient to the nature conservation, where I think good wetland conservation, good wetland restoration can achieve both of those objectives. So I thought it was very interesting that you'd pulled that out from your research, that about demonstrating the benefits to our community is really important. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Rob. That's very kind.
Okay, I think Matt, you gave these figures that we have 51 people connected today. You put that in the chat probably, yeah. So that's quite a nice number. We have more than 100 people registered. And yesterday we had also about 51 people, and today again, probably different ones or partly different ones. It's very encouraging that we have so many people attending the symposium. So I want to thank everybody for that. And then I would like to ask whether there are any, oh yeah, Nadezhda has raised her hand. Go ahead, Nadezhda.
Okay, just a very brief comment. This is not a question, this is just a comment. You know, I've been thinking about this restoration projects and talking to communities and taking into account communities. Just from my own experience, you know, we have to be very careful what country, I mean, which country we're talking about. It's very different in low income, middle income. You know, Steen, you just mentioned Finland. I mean, I guess Finnish people, you know, it's not the same when you compare restoration in Finland and when you compare it in, for example, Macedonia, where I come from. So it's very, very complicated to explain people about long-term effects. Okay, so in middle income or low income countries, they want to see short-term effects because people are struggling, you know, so you can't tell them, yeah, sure, in 30 years, there will be birds flying here, or you will be rich, you'll have a lot of tourists coming, you know, it's just something to bear in mind. When you guys work on these projects everywhere in the world, it's, well, just a comment, because sometimes it's very complicated to explain to local communities what they're going to gain, you know, what their gain will be. Sometimes they just don't see it. Yeah, that was it. Yeah, thanks.
That's not. Thank you very much. If I may, if Jos, if that's all right, if I just
of course go ahead.
Respond. Yes. No, that's a very good point. Indeed, like as part of the research design, I also did not want to focus just on like the rich or high income countries. So that's why I included countries from different parts of Europe. I had from like 2 projects from Lithuania, project from Greece, from Spain, from Slovakia, from also Finland and Sweden and Ireland. So indeed, like for example in Slovakia, where there of course there's the post-Soviet like there's still some impact of the post-Soviet era. And I also had a project in Hungary where there was a similar case where people aren't, like, according to the restoration practitioners, they were less inclined to do things for the public good, or where there was not much of a participatory culture. So that then, of course, you need to have different incentives to get people on board. For example, in Finland, there is a very high participatory culture, and people have also the resources to create wetlands or to restore wetlands, because they have a crane and they have, I don't know, chainsaws necessary. They just have it in their local sheds. Well, that was absolutely not the case in Slovakia or Lithuania, where instead the restoration practitioners also provided like equipment enabled to get the restoration project started. But then in that case, for instance, in Lithuania and in Slovakia, they created agri-environmental payments. And that was partially also from the Common Agricultural Policy of the European Union. And that also ensured that there were, well, short-term benefits, because if you change your agricultural practices, you then are able to receive these payments also in the short term. But also, yeah, if you continue these practices, you also ensure a long-term source of income through more environmentally friendly practices of agriculture. So yes, absolutely, different incentives for different contexts, and that also definitely highlights the need to adjust and adapt to the local contexts. But thank you for your comment.
Okay. Thank you very much also.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. There is still a few minutes for questions or discussion if you want.
I cannot see any at the moment. We had a good flurry, but...
Yeah, that's right. We can also just have a 3-minute break, because it's quite a long afternoon, right?
That's true.
So
maybe have a break.
I will be back in 3 minutes.
Jos, before we start, I see that Jan Cavet has his hand raised, so I wonder whether he wants to make a comment. I shall ask.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no problem. But wait for a little minute, maybe.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you, Jan.
So I want to greet you and thank you for guidance of the meeting. And I'm happy to be with you, at least online, because I'm sitting at home and it's very convenient to me to communicate with you, with all of you in this way. So good luck to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jan. We appreciate very much that you are listening to us.
Well, see you tomorrow again. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye-bye. Okay. It's 4:15 as far as I'm concerned. So let's continue the program. And the next talk is it's about remote sensing again. The Sentinel-1 is mentioned. Wetlands from the satellite. The habitats of Gallo-Cante Lake in northeastern Spain. And Judith Sonscano will present the talk, and her co-author Carmen Castañeda will be here to answer questions. Okay.
Thanks for the opportunity to participate in this meeting. My name is Judith Sanz, and I'm here to introduce the habitat of Gallo-Cante Lake, northeast Spain, as viewed by Sentinel-1. The following presentation is structured in 4 parts. 1. Introduction. 2. Methods. 3. MELEX domains, radar response, and finally 4. Conclusion. As well as water is fundamental to develop of life, ecosystem, and habitat distribution. At present, it's difficult to obtain continuous follow record of water level in producing wetlands. This probably limits the knowledge of weather environments. Remote sensing is used to the weather monitoring at different scales, as shown by the studies based on multispectral and synthetic aperture radar images. However, there are few studies of remote sensing applied to monitoring of water surface including wetlands. Okay, I will present our study. Gallo-Cante Lake is the largest intermittent saline lake in Western Europe and is located at 1,000 meters SLL in the Iberian Red Spain, in a semi-arid environment. Almost half of the natural reserve survey extent correspond to habitats suggested to intermittent flooding. Sentinel-1 is a synthetic aperture radar. Satellite image the ground surface every 6 days, independent of solar illumination and cloud cover. The radar data are acquired in C-band. The text product is high resolution, broad range detect. The pixel size is 10 meters. There are 2 acquisition polarization modes, vertical, and vertical horizontal. Okay, the objective of this study, to analyze the potential of Sentinel-1 satellite image to study the water surface and the intermittent flooded habitat of Gallo-Cante Lake. The response by scatter coefficient is analyzed 2 seasons. Okay, in the part of the method, we select 2 Sentinel-1 images in the 2 modes polarization. The image was representative contrast the ideal condition of the lake. The dry season corresponds to the 10th of October, 2009, non-flood day, and the wet season corresponds to the 2nd of February, 2020. flood day. The water level and the meteorological day were resized to at Los Picos weather station. The habitats made in Gallo Canta Lake were synthesized in 3 main lake domains. Gallo Canta Lake domains, parapet. The lake bed extends at the center of the lake, with submerged vegetation during flood period. When the lake has no water, it's at very bottom with occurrence of agar mats. The Perilaco stream domain is surrounding the lake bed and is temporarily flooded. It is characterized by patches of mixed wetland areas vegetation adapted to flooding and salinity. The terrace domains correspond to crops and rural vegetation occupying the dry soil around the lake. The non-flood day, the water level was 12.6 centimeters. The cumulative rainfall was 6 millimeters. The wind velocity was 5.6 meters per second. And the flood day, lake water level was 64.7 centimeters. And the wind velocity was 6.6 meters per second. Okay, in the past, the processing of Sentinel-1 image. The radiometric calibration was applied in order to correct the radar signal and compare the two. The resulting scatter coefficient was transformed into decibel values. We applied a Lie speckle filter to improve the signal-noise relation of the radar image. Finally, a geometric correlation was performed to integrate satellite data into the system. A 995-meter ASL control line was used to map the study area, and the backscatter was analyzed for three lake domains. Okay, in the part of the reversal discussion. In relation to the backscatter coefficient, the vertical horizontal polarization showed always lower backscatter values than the vertical polarization mode. The median vertical horizontal backscatter was less than -22 decibels and did not show with significant difference between domains or between dates. The vertical backscatter values showed significant difference for the lake domain on both dates. In general, results showed lower decibel values for all domains in the wet season than in the dry season. Previous rainfall to the image acquisition, dry season, probably increased the surface soil moisture and conditioned the radar signal. Lake bed domains. As expected, the backscatter values were the lowest and showed a significant difference between the two dates. Although it is a flat bottom, the presence of water on the flood day reflects more negative values than for the dry day. The backscatter distribution of the water surface indicates that some areas are probably affected by the wind action. In the flood day, the water surface was identified with a median backscatter of -22.6 decibels. 64.7 centimeters of water level was resides in the lake. In the case not flood day, the soil presents a median of -16.6 decibels. 12.5 centimeters of water level was reside in the lake, probably due to the occurrence of a discontinuous malpond for water and the rural location. Perilaco stream domain. The backscatter presented a wide range of values, especially for the wet season, due to a mixed response of the radar signal. It is explained by the diversity of the basal wetland vegetation and the potential presence of water in the low Perilaco stream areas. For the dry season, the wide backscatter range and median may have been affected by the moisture of the one to the previous rainfall, the 6 millimeters. Terrace domain. The backscatter response was analogous in two seasons. The backscatter range was the lowest of the three domains. In reaction of conclusion, the Sentinel-1 backscatter showed that the lake bed has significant difference between the dry and flood season. Sentinel-1 can identify change in the presence of open water. The Perilaco stream domain showed the widest backscatter range and a complex response due to the various vegetation type and cover. The habitat response to vertical backscatter of Sentinel-1 could be completed with a higher resolution of X-band radar image in order to discriminate different vegetation types. future analysis should be applied to a set of images during various conditions of lake water levels. Thanks for your time.
We do have time for some questions if people would think to ask something about Lake Calocanta in northeastern Spain. Please go ahead. Yeah, Ricardo.
Hi. Yeah. One question. Maybe it's not clear for me. So the backscatter from the radar is conditioned by the soil moisture, right? So it's there are statistically differences between the center of the lake bed and surroundings, right?
Carmen,
okay,
can you?
Carmen, yeah, Carmen, can you? Yes. Are you there? Sorry.
Oui.
I think Carmen had let us know that she was going to fill in for Judith, but I don't know whether it works. Okay, please speak up if.
She is here, and you are unmuted, I think, Carmen. Can you speak? Because we cannot hear you.
Well, I'm sorry, it seems that it doesn't work. Maybe a technical point in her computer. Okay.
We will have to save it until the discussion, I think.
Yeah, maybe we can just postpone the discussion, and in that case, I propose that we continue on with the program. And we have another presentation on remote sensing, and this one is presented by Nadezhda Apostolova, who is not only a very well-known scientist in pharmaceutical sciences, but by and large is going into the wetland world as well. So this is not her first paper, and she has already several publications on remote sensing in wetlands, and she's now going to talk about Lake Prespa. Not entirely different, or I mean, not entirely disconnected from Lake Ohrid. Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like really to thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to talk about Lake Prespa. My name is Nadezhda Apostolova. I think many of you know me. Well, I'm a member of the Ohrid SOS Citizens Initiative in Skopje, Macedonia. And I will be talking about the changes in Lake Prespa and its surroundings studied by remote sensing methodology, a study which was done in collaboration with Juan Soria from the University of Valencia in Spain. So first of all, I will give you a short introduction about our area of interest. Ohrid Prespa Lake System is the oldest and most diverse permanent lake system in Europe. It dates from more than 1 million years ago. It has been declared Transboundary Biosphere Reserve. This was done by UNESCO in 2014. And for you to be able to grasp the importance of this area, just let me show you that Lake Prespa was declared the Ramsar site in 1995. Lake Ohrid was declared the Ramsar site a couple of months ago. And then Lake Ohrid is a UNESCO World Heritage Site since the 70s. And we also have several national parks spanning this area in the 3 countries. So this is a transboundary area, as I said. Lake Ohrid is shared by Macedonia and Albania. And Lake Prespa is actually composed of 2 lakes, Lake Macro Prespa or Big Prespa, shared by the 3 countries, Albania, Macedonia, and Greece, and Lake Micro Prespa or Small Prespa, that is entirely in Greece, and whose level has been artificially maintained, and I won't be talking about this lake. Lake Prespa is a tectonic lake whose age is still not known fully, but it is probably at least 1 million years old. You can see here data about its depth, volume, water input, and water output. Importantly, we don't have big rivers going into the lake, and we also don't have big rivers getting out of the lake. So the half of its water output is actually through Mount Galichitsa into Lake Ohrid. So Mount Galichitsa is a karstic mountain, and because Lake Prespa is located 200 meters higher, the altitude is higher than Lake Ohrid, so water flows from Prespa to Ohrid and feeds Ohrid Lake with fresh water. So 25% of the water that Ohrid Lake receives actually comes from Prespa Lake. Unfortunately, Prespa Lake water level has been dropping. You can see what has been going on since the 50s. The rate is not constant. The rate of this decrease is not constant, but it's permanent over the years. Now, over the last decade, it's probably getting worse, and I'll show you what it looks like now, what it looked like last year. We reached the absolute historical minimum of the water level, so it is the lowest since records exist. Okay, so about 10 meters of depth have been lost. The lake is literally disappearing. These are images from 2020. As you can see, a real disaster. And the question is, what is going on? Which are the reasons for this dramatic loss of water? So maybe it's easier to think that this is just climate change, although climate change is a very complicated actually phenomenon. It's not only one phenomenon. We have restricted precipitation, especially snowfall from the surrounding mountains, maybe higher air and water temperature, less water input through the rivers, increased water abstraction for irrigation over the decades, and also hydrogeological modifications. So what is meant by this? Earthquakes. So this is an area where there have been earthquakes several important earthquakes over the past years, and one was a couple of years ago, and some people were actually even thinking that this may be a reason why more water is going from Prespa to Ohrid Lake, although this hasn't been studied and it's not known really. Actually, there is one paper, a very interesting paper from 2017 by our Greek colleagues that studied very carefully in detail the loss of water in Prespa Lake. And I'm only going to give you a very short summary of what they found. So you see there are two major drops in water level in the 70s and in the late 80s and early 90s. This is probably due to, it was triggered by a Mediterranean-wide droughts. However, it was intensified by water abstraction. So maybe they suggest, these authors, that 72% of the reason of why water was lost was due to water abstraction, and only 28% was due to climate-related decreases. So the aim of the present study was to describe the changes in the surface area, in the size of the lake, and the vegetation in its surroundings, in the surrounding area, over the period in which we have available satellite images, and that's from 1984 to 2020. For the vegetation, we quantified an index called Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, which is the ratio between the reflectance in red and near infrared bands of the spectrum. On this slide, you can see the changes in the surface area. You can see two images, the first one and the last one, over the studied years. And you can see the rate of the decrease in the surface area. So we have quantified this, and we have seen that the lake has lost about 7% of its size, of its surface. And also you can see that the major drop was in the late 80s. And this is exactly, it matches perfectly with the records that we have about when we had a major drop in the water level, in the depth of the lake. We next studied the vegetation in the area surrounding the lake, and these are the images that we obtained. It's always from the summer period, between June and August. So these are real images showing you the greenness, let's say, of the area. So we obtained the Normalized Difference Vegetation Index. So this goes, as you probably all know, from -1 to 1. So the higher the number, the greener the area. So there is more vegetation and healthier vegetation. And this number has increased over the years, over the studied period. Here on this slide, you can see the false color images from 1984 and 2020. So bear in mind that here the red refers to green. Okay, the red color actually represents the vegetation, the green vegetation. And in this, so when we calculated this studied area, which was about 5,000 square kilometers, we saw that the vegetated surface, which has a value of NDVI greater than 0.13, so this surface increased from 78% to 86%. And when we looked at the area with the highest vegetation intensity, this is higher than 0.45, this increase was 40%. So there is an increase in the vegetation in this area. What was the reason for this, or what is the reason for this? Well, we don't know exactly, but I want to show you now here the elevation map, a digital model of elevation map, showing you the area. So I have put here the altitudes of this area. Now, Pelagonia is this is an area where we have a lot of cultivation of different crops, and we think that maybe the green here has increased, so maybe this area, the agriculture has increased here, so there is more water extraction over the years. And importantly, I have found information that there is an increase in corn cultivation, and corn means more water than other crops. Another possibility is also that there is more forest, because these are all forests. This is a high mountain here, Mount Baba, with the highest peak, Pilister. So maybe also water is stuck in these woods. It doesn't flow to the lake. I don't know. That's another possibility. So this has to be studied in greater detail in the future. We asked for information from the National Hydrometeorological Service in Macedonia to see whether there is a correlation between these changes in the water level of Lake Prespa and temperature and precipitation. So I'm going to show you data about two places, two sites on the shore of the lake. One is Pretor. Pretor is here in the northeastern part of the lake. From Lake Pretor, we have temperature and precipitation data that I'll show you now. So we have been given the mean temperature values since 1991. And we can see here that there has been an increase in the temperatures, both the maximal monthly temperature, mean monthly temperature, the minimal mean monthly temperature also. This is even more actually, and the mean annual temperature. If you look at the annual temperature in this area. Okay, so nothing strange here. We all know that temperature, there is a rise in the temperatures almost everywhere. When you look at the precipitation in Pretor, in the same site, however, there is an increase, a slight increase in the annual precipitation. Also a tendency of slight increase in the mean monthly precipitation. However, no changes in the maximum monthly precipitation. So this can be interpreted. This can mean that we have more rain in other months that are not the month of maximal rain. So there is a change maybe in the pattern of precipitation over the year. If you look at the maximum, the percentage that this maximum monthly precipitation is compared to the total annual precipitation, you see that this drops, right? This goes down. So it doesn't rain. It rains less in the month where it used to rain the most. Let's say this is the tendency. Okay, and the next slide. This slide gives you information about the correlation between the temperature and the precipitation. And as you can see, there is no correlation. So it doesn't mean that it rained less in the years where it was colder or anything like that. We also studied another spot, another site. It's called Stenye. It's virtually just below Mount Galichica. We don't have the data about temperature here. This is an automatic station that only has records of precipitation. And you can see here virtually almost 40 years. So what we saw here was that there was a decrease. There's been a decrease in the annual precipitation over the years. Also a decrease in the mean monthly precipitation and in the maximum monthly precipitation. However, the maximum monthly precipitation versus the total annual precipitation, there haven't been any changes. So it means that the month where it most rains remains the same over the years. So I would like to close this presentation by concluding that Lake Prespa has suffered dramatic drop in its water level over the past decades. Remote sensing methodology seems a useful way to study Lake Prespa, both regarding its size and the surrounding area, the vegetation in the surrounding area. This increase in the vegetation may be associated with enhanced irrigation for agricultural use of the area. And this is a crucial factor participating in the loss of water. So this needs to be assessed and in great detail and studied. And very importantly, the survival of the lake requires urgent measures, strong legislation at all levels, and much better cooperation among the three involved countries. This should not be regarded as a Macedonian problem. It should not be regarded even as a Balkan problem, but it is a European problem. So I would really like to stress this, that we need urgent measures in order to avoid the disappearance of this lake of great importance. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nadezhda, for this interesting talk. It is striking that Lake Prespa is losing water, and so you didn't talk much about the consequences for the biota in the lake. Is there something? There have been studies, I'm sure. Can you tell us a little bit about that? Is it very detrimental what has happened for what lives in the lake?
Yes, definitely. I don't have data like quantitation now. I can't give you numbers, but yes, there have been several reports by the university, by the Faculty of Natural Sciences, about at all levels, at levels of the microorganisms, fish, plants. I mean, even if you look at the water, the quality of the water is, I mean, I haven't been there for years now. The last time I was there was 5 years ago, personally, I mean. If you look at photos, I mean, the water looks different, and there have been different algae growing. I don't know, especially the coastal area in some areas of the lake looks really polluted, like really dirty, or so yes, definitely the biodiversity is under big pressure at this time. I was just looking at some images this morning because the swimming season, the holiday season is started. People are going there for holidays, and many people just avoid even swimming in the lake now. In some areas, particularly in some areas, I'm not saying that the entire lake is like that, but in some areas that used to be beach, I mean, people would just go there and swim. They are like a swamp now. So a lot of mud, a lot of dirty looking water, and people just avoid them.
That doesn't sound very positive indeed. So the actions are needed again, and this may be even more complicated because more countries are involved, do you think? Or what do you think about the possibility to stop these developments?
Yes, definitely. This is I don't think the Macedonian authorities, although they're not doing what they should be doing, that's for sure. Even if they were doing, I don't think they would be able to solve the problem by themselves. So definitely it's needed. I mean, a greater cooperation by the three countries is needed in order to first study the problem. I don't think it's been studied well enough. And then to find short term actions and also long term, but now really there is something needs to be undertaken, and that's something that the three countries should do. So in Macedonia, the government said they had a body of experts that was constituted 1 year ago, and they have a plan, an action plan, but we don't see anything going on. So I don't know if that action plan has been put into practice, or even if this body of experts have come up with really what should be done first, and where will the money come from? And my plan was now to put more pressure on the government to at least explain what they're doing, because we don't know if they're doing anything at all. PONT is crucial. I think PONT, the press powergrid,
I know about it.
Yeah, so PONT, I think, probably has a lot of influence, and they know the area very well, and they also have a lot of activities in Albania. So they can be a good sort of bridge, between the countries, or I don't know, maybe they are a good partner to have at this time.
Okay, thank you very much. Indeed, identifying the main cause, of course, is very important before you can do anything. But maybe we can talk about this at the end session and the discussion a little bit further. We have to move on now. Thank you very much, Nadezhda. And now we are going to the first of two presentations about ponds, more specifically the Ponderful project, which shows that people who are studying this are very fond of their object. Okay.
My name is Maria Cuenca. I am postdoc at the University of Vic in Spain. And I'm involved in the project Ponderful that you have been already listening from my previous colleague. And Ponderful is the pond ecosystem for resilient future landscape in climate change. Ponderful is an European project under the umbrella of Horizon 2020. It started last December in 2020 and it runs for 4 years. The main objective of Ponderful is studying the interaction and feedbacks between ponds biodiversity, ecosystem services, and climate change at multiple spatial scale. Ponderful is a multidisciplinary and high collaborative project that involves 18 partners distributed in 8 different countries across Europe and also including Uruguay. And the University of Vic in Spain acts as the main coordinator of the project. Why ponds and not lake? We decided to focus on ponds because they are highly abundant. They represent between the 30 to the 50% of the standing water worldwide. They have a key role in mitigation and adaptation of climate change, holding the 70% of the species pool in Europe and acting as biodiversity hotspot. They provide also numerous ecosystem services, including carbon storage, water provisioning, flood control, recreation, and other services for industry, for example. However, they have been threatened in the last century, and between the 50 and the 90% of the ponds have been lost in the past century. Despite their importance in the ecosystem, small ponds have been largely ignored by freshwater biologists and neglected by policymakers and management. With this, the 3 main objectives of Ponderful that I will explain later a bit more in detail is evaluate the interaction and feedbacks between biodiversity, ecosystem services, and climate change. Develop future scenario for pondscape in the context of climate change, land use, and change in policies, and also develop and test the implementation of effective nature-based solution in collaboration with the stakeholder and using demo sites. So, as I mentioned, the main objective of Ponderful is focus on biodiversity and ecosystem processes, and it tries to evaluate the interaction between biodiversity, climate change, and ecosystem services across multiple spatial scales. The focus of the first objectives is study how climate change, land use, and hydroperiod, and the interaction between these three components can affect biodiversity and ecosystem services. As you know, Earth's average temperature have increased in the last century by 1.2 degrees, but not only that, there have been also an increase of extreme events as heat waves or flooding. Also, the agriculture in the last century have been increased, and currently between the 86% to the 90% of the water consumption is going to agriculture, and that effect is predicted to increase in the next year. And together with that, the precipitation expectations in the Mediterranean regions is expected also to decrease in the next century by the 25 to the 30%, where it will affect the hydroperiod of ponds. With that, we wanted to study the effect of the three components that I just mentioned across Europe. For that, we will select 30 ponds for the 8 countries that we have. In each country, as an example here, I just put Spain, that is the region where I am working, in Catalonia. We have 5 pondscapes, and in each pondscape we have 6 different ponds. In these 6 different ponds, we try to have different conditions that combine, as I mentioned, hydroperiod and land use, and we have 3 land use levels, including high, medium, and low, and 2 hydroperiod conditions, that is permanent ponds or not permanent ponds. In each ponds, we quantify several variables, including environmental variables. For example, human activities, there is building or another infrastructure around the pond, as roads, for example. We also quantify, of course, land use, focus on agriculture, and cow presence. We quantify the morphometry, the water aspect, and other aspects of the pond, for example, emerging vegetation. Of course, we quantify also biodiversity, including macrophytes, so plankton and macroinvertebrates that we quantified in the pond by collecting the individuals. And also we check for the composition and the site distribution, but also from the distribution of the different species in the different macrohabitat of the pond. And also we quantify amphibians and fish presence by environmental DNA. Finally, we collect also variables in terms of ecosystem functions, including carbon sequestration, pond metabolism, or greenhouse gases emission. All these traits that I had just mentioned will be quantified in the 30 ponds per country across Europe and also include Uruguay. But in addition with that, we have existing data on biodiversity, local environment condition, and land use that include more than 2,500 datasets. And also we have running actually some mesocosms experiment that targets the experiment on temperature and climate change. Using all the information that I just mentioned, the second objective of Ponderful, it will be to create the future scenario for pondscape in the context of climate change, land use, and change policies. So in Objective 2, all the database collected by Objective 1 in terms of climate change, land use, social economic development, but also information in terms of biodiversity will help to create the scenarios and modeling for Objective 1 that in turn it will help in the mitigation measurement. And as you can see also in this figure, anthropogenic driver can affect climate change, of course, and it can affect the land use. That per se will affect pond ecosystem function, and finally ecosystem service. That in turn, it will feed back again to human well-being, policymakers, and anthropogenic drivers. So the objective 2 will be focused on develop the scenarios of ponds management across the European region using the conceptual information from the stratified sampling, but also the information collected from the database that we have already. Also, it will develop the integrative and predictive modeling framework. And with all of the information, it will produce the priority maps for intervention to optimize pondscape management in terms of ponds that will be more effective for the future climate change. And finally, in the objective 3, that is focused on the nature-based solutions, as my previous colleagues mentioned, Pond4U will be focused on develop guidance for planning and management of ponds and pondscape as nature-based solution for climate change adaptation and mitigation. And to achieve this objective, we will set up a network of demo sites across Europe where pondscape will act as a nature-based solutions and to develop the tools necessary for the decision maker and local practitioner to promote and guide the implementation of ponds as nature-based solutions. Finally, I would like to summarize the Pond4U projects in the expected scientific impact that we want to produce. We want to assess the role of pondscape in maintaining biodiversity and climate resilience. We want to find the link between pond biodiversity, ecosystem services, and climate change, and also predict how pondscape will respond to climate change and land use scenario. But also we will quantify the pond's contribution to climate change mitigation and adaptations and create the ponds as nature-based solution. In addition, we have some societal and policy impacts, including the providing the tools to use pondscape as natural-based solution and increase the resilience to climate change. And finally, to create the policy makers and the management of ponds in the different regions. And with all of that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I will be open for questions.
No. So, can I ask Aurélie Boissezon? Very nice to have you on the program, Aurélie, to talk about the demo sites that you already announced in your talk, Maria Cuenca. So, Aurélie, just take it away.
My name is Aurélie Boissezon, and I am working at the University of Applied Sciences and Art of Western Switzerland. Our institution is implied in the European project Pond4U that Maya presented you just before. And I'm here to give you a presentation of a part of this project which aim at developing demo sites to highlight the efficiency of pondscapes as nature-based solution to climate change. So demo sites development and assessment in one of the tasks of work package 4 that we co-lead with Pascal Nicolet from the Fresh Habitat Trust from United Kingdom. The ultimate goal of work here is to develop guidance for planning and management of ponds and pondscapes as nature-based solution for climate change adaptation and mitigation, for the delivery of ecosystem services and function, their nature contribution to people, and their role in biodiversity conservation. The Pond4U's approach involves stakeholders and researchers from a wide range of disciplines. As such, the standardization of the terminology and concept used, as well as the development of a common understanding of key issues relevant for the project is crucial. But I will give you here just a definition we use for pondscapes. So a pondscape is a landscape including a congregation of ponds with spatial proximity or connectedness that potentially sustain species population. This is a definition of Busby. The boundaries of a pondscapes may vary and depend on the taxonomic group considered and potentially also on social consideration. An example of pondscape delineation targeted for amphibians is presented by Busby, But the delineation of pondscape can also, of course, target other taxonomic groups with a larger or even a smaller dispersal potential, such as plants, dragonflies, reptiles, or birds. The delineation can also, in addition to biodiversity, integrate geographical and or social aspects. For example, linked to land use, forest, meadows, urban area, or to management issues, such as the boundaries of nature reserve. As a consequence, a wide diversity of pondscapes can be described. They can vary in area, being small, example, 1 square kilometer, to large. Their pond density can range from low to very high, and the shapes of pondscapes can be very, very diverse, circular, linear, or any other. So we use demonstration sites, so-called demo sites, for analyzing the policy context and social perception of ponds, for quantifying the biodiversity, their ecosystem services and nature contribution to people, developing scenarios for climate change, using pondscapes, and testing the implemented nature-based solution. We develop demo sites in 8 countries across Europe and Uruguay. Each demo site leader defined with local stakeholders 1 to 3 demo pondscapes to assess. So in total, we are coordinating 15 demo pondscapes that are finally distributed in 4 bioclimatic zones and contrasting landscape and also social and political context. And if you want to have a good example of pondscapes description, you can have a look to the video made by our PhD student Julie Fahey about demonstration sites we choose in Switzerland following this link. It's a 5-minute video that you will be able to look later. So a protocol has been developed to support Pondful participants assessing for each demo site the effectiveness of nature-based solution implemented in their pondscape. The information to be collected will be based on data already available, including from previous studies, if available, and on measurement of metrics this year and next year. The information covers the following 3 topics, or the 3 pillars of the assessment. So biodiversity, nature contribution to people and ecosystem services, and cost and benefits. So additionally, some basic descriptive information will also be collected to characterize the investigated pondscape. The output will be a user-friendly leaflet, which will present the NBS assessment and the related collected information. The NBS that will be selected as a best practice will be uploaded on the European database OPLA, at least, and this selection will also be promoted in our final handbook. As often, several nature-based solutions have been implemented in the same pondscapes. They will generally be assessed separately before assessing the whole investigated pondscape. For example, here in the pondscape Wedgusy in Switzerland, the first set of nature-based solution was implemented by creating 9 large new ponds in the 60s. And in the same pondscape, a second program of NBS implemented in the year 2000 led to the creation of a second set of 50 small ponds. These two NBS will be assessed separately, of course, and they will be considered together only later for the global assessment of the pondscape. And I'm going to explain you this approach. Nature-based solutions are, we can say, measures implemented to deliver outcomes that we desire. And the outcome expected are the nature's contribution to people ecosystem services. So the NBS considered for Pondaful are pond creation, pond restoration, and pond management NBS. They can be local, I mean pond scale, or even smaller scale, or regional, I mean at the pondscape scale, or even both. So the regional scale approach, the pondscape scale, is the main objective and the novelty of Pondaful project. And therefore, the NBS assessment has to be conducted at this scale. Nevertheless, as I said before, local management measures, pond-specific, have to be considered when their cumulative effect, I mean, on several ponds, for example, impacts the pondscape scale, or when they represent best practices to be promoted and to potentially replicate elsewhere. So all NCPs that are described in scientific literature are not necessarily relevant to ponds and pondscapes. They are not expected outcomes from the NBS investigated in the framework of Pondaful. So during the development of the project, we choose among the 18 NCPs, only 11 NCPs according to their relevance for a project. So the list of those 11 NCPs will be screened according to 5 criteria. The expectation of stakeholders, for example, I don't know, climate regulation, pollination, of regulation of hazards, identified through the survey conducted by other work package during workshop. And the objective of Pondaful, climate change mitigation and adaptation on biodiversity conservation. According also to the available information, for example, biodiversity data from non-governmental organization, the statistics on physical or psychological experiences from stakeholders, etc. The available human resource provided by Pondaful, I mean the number of person-months available for this task, and the result available from other Pondaful work package. Thanks for your attention, and I am now open to your questions.
Thank you very much, Aurélie. I think we have several talks open for questions. I propose actually that we first go back to Carmen, whether she has a no problem. Do you still remember the question that was posed by Ricardo?
Yes.
Okay, please
go ahead. The question was about radar and Sentinel-1 and also the moisture, the soil moisture, not?
Yeah, I think so.
Yes, the radar signal is affected mainly by soil moisture and also by soil or ground roughness. The rugosity of the surface, of the soil surface, are the two variables. And it's together. What is your question exactly?
Ricardo, can you?
Yeah, well, as it is affected by roughness and moisture, I guess that that's why you found differences between the lake bed and surroundings, right?
Yes. This is why when you have the water, when you have a surface of calm water, you have a black. This is no responses at all, because the backscatter is sending out by reflecting out of the sensor. But if you have a windy day with water affected by waves, you have a roughness, and you can have a brighted response, similar to vegetated and land areas. It depends.
All right. So, how do you expect to find differences between different types of vegetation with radar?
We are not looking for differences in type of vegetation there, but in the area which is flooded and intermittently flooded. So because the type of signal in these areas with emerged vegetation and water is different from the areas with only vegetation and land, and different from open surface water. So we expected to find if Sentinel-1 was able to separate differences between the dry season and the flooding season. And to see if we can intensify the data to be studied to find more situations to be analyzed.
All right. All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I see there is a question on the question and answers by Renske Vroom, which is on the Wonderful project. She says, thanks for a nice presentation on a very cool project. These ponds are very important because they can be greenhouse gas emissions hotspots. Related to this, I was wondering whether you are focusing on natural or man-made ponds, or are both included, and are you going to measure methane ebullition? Okay.
I think that I can reply that question. Okay. So the focus of the ponds is both artificial and natural. But what we were looking for is that all the ponds were smaller than 1 hectare, and they were in an altitude lower of 800 meters. So then, so then it's like a search of ponds that are similar enough in a region, in a small area that is called in the Wonderful, because we were looking this network. So that's why we include both natural and artificial.
Okay, thank you very much. Dominique Zak also has commented on this, and he also assumes that methane emissions are higher in human-made systems compared to other wetlands, but he also thinks that maybe there is a comparatively high carbon sequestration function. Are you also studying that?
Yes, we are studying also the methanes and the carbon emissions in ponds. I have to say that I'm not an expert on it. Maybe I really have extra comments on it. But just to return my question, I am not sure why it's expecting that artificial ponds are producing more methane that's natural wetlands. I don't know if no.
Well, it's a question we have, so hopefully we will be able to answer to that in a few years. It's really a question, yeah. Because it's
yes, still open, of course. These are all interesting questions that you will tackle. And yeah, we'll see. There was also this question about ebullition specifically, because that's always tricky when you measure methane emissions, that the bubbles can really escape, and that's very hard to quantify. But it can be done, but it needs special attention. And I don't know whether it's part of your project.
Actually, yes. So it's funny when you say that it's a special attention, because our technology is not, I mean, it makes the work for sure, but it's like basically a bucket that you put on the surface of the pond. Yeah. You create a vacuum. And then the way that it works is that the emission that the ponds is the gases that the pond is emitting, it get accumulated in this kind of bucket that is backwards, is ups and down. And then the way that we collect it is basically this bucket have a valve that you can open and close, and we collected the gases that are having accumulated during 1 week, minimal 1 week on them. So it's high technology.
Yeah, I see. I understand. Thank you.
It was a smart creation.
I myself, I have a completely different type of question for the Wonderful project. You are really measuring very many different characteristics of these pondscapes, and the scale is also quite high because you are comparing pondscapes rather than ponds. So how are you actually going to do the comparison? Are you going just only to quantitatively look at the outcomes and then make a story out of that, or are you going also to use certain procedures to test outcomes? So I have not really heard much about that yet.
Yeah, well, the fact is that we faced a very, very diverse situation of pondscape. If you are, I hear this before, if you are in Switzerland or in Turkey, it's not the same condition, it's not the same approach. So we don't have the same available information. People don't look at ponds and pondscapes in the same way. So what we've done, we decided it will be difficult to compare situations between countries. We still define some compulsory indicator for NCP and the biodiversity parameters to be able to have a common baseline on some parameters. But most of protocol is flexible to be able to stuck to the particularities of pondscapes in terms of biodiversity, but also in terms of social context. We cannot really compare everything. And for example, also in Switzerland, we have a federal system. It doesn't work the same when you want to engage stakeholder and to analyze the policy context. You won't have the same situation in other countries such as Spain, which is really rich and interesting to see how it works in different countries. But we don't want, I don't think we will quantitatively compare the results, but we will at least, we want to define some best practices. And it can be in any countries.
I can imagine that for each specific country, it may be very interesting to know more about their own pondscapes.
And also
that's already a first step, and then you can also really scale up and maybe at a higher level of integration, start comparing things and maybe including the differences in interaction with stakeholders. That could also be a very interesting thing to study.
Yes, it is. It is. And yes, we also I don't remember what I wanted to say, but well, yes, to engage people, local people, you have to work locally with them. So
yeah,
of Demos Aikido have to work locally, following more or less the same protocol, especially for. I'm a biologist. We are a lot of biologists finally, and we are not social specialists or economists. So we have instruction and some people who are working as a help desk in the consortium. We also work as a help desk for biodiversity questions.
Yeah, I see. So
knowledge and skills. It's really, really interesting. Yes.
Yeah, if you could really involve people with different backgrounds in the project, that would be very helpful, I would think. You know? Yeah. But it's already quite rich in that case anyway, of course. Okay. Patrick, I see your hand raised. Go ahead.
Yes, it is just a comment, not really a question. There was quite a few live projects on ponds in the last decades. And very few research projects, and it's very nice to see appearing European broad-scale research projects on ponds. This is really great news. Congratulations for making it.
Yeah, it will definitely put ponds on the map, and that's really true. I think it is a focal point then in so many countries, and I also expect already from that fact quite interesting results, and also interest in ponds will increase. Yeah,
we will come back to present you some results. Here we are just the approach, but we don't have any results yet to explain.
No, of course, it would be very nice if you keep coming back to our annual meeting so that we can see the project develop. It would be very interesting. Yeah. Okay. Any other people? Yeah, I think Matt, you are also raising your hand.
Yeah, I'm just interested because the focus on nature-based solutions, which is getting a lot of traction everywhere at the moment. Here in the UK, there's a lot of policy debate, and often a lot of those are kind of constructed or restored nature-based solutions. But I wonder whether the project is going to look at sort of existing, say, ponds or pondscapes of very high value, biodiversity value. But if someone wants to turn it into a nature-based solution that might have a big negative impact on it. I'm thinking, for example, if a farmer wanted to deal with their runoff from their land, which had a lot of nutrients in it, and they decided to put it through the pond because it would clean it before it goes into the river, that is a benefit for the river, but it's a negative impact on the pond. And I wondered whether in the project you're going to be looking at those negative consequences potentially of nature-based solutions. And will you be actually kind of destroying some ponds to see what happens?
Yes, well, you're true. Finally, it's a little bit confusing when you speak about nature contribution to people, because it's the outcome we expect from the NBS. But finally, the real definition of nature contribution to people, it's benefits and damage and disadvantage potentially from ponds and pondscapes. And even for gas emission, we know that we will have some ponds that will have a negative effect on the gas emissions. We just hope to, well, we won't be able to define a perfect pond that responds to every needs. I mean, every expectation from different stakeholders. So the purpose here is to measure benefits, costs, disadvantage of our ponds and pondscapes, and to put this in a decision tool, and to also work with stakeholders to say, okay, how to decide according to what do you want in this particular situation. Do you want to regulate the water quality for the river down, or do you it's a question of modelization and a trade-off between benefits and cost and disadvantages. I'm pretty sure we won't define a perfect situation, and we will have to be very careful how to communicate about that, because we don't want to destroy ponds. So
yeah.
it's really tricky. I think we really have to be careful of that. But
it links back to our very first presentation today, I think, is communicating that uncertainty, that variability. It's not one pond fits all. You need multiple different ones in different locations, in different contexts. So yeah, it's a nice challenge, but at least you will have some brilliant data to back up those comments, which would be fantastic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
And thinking about temporary ponds that dry out regularly, they are often very interesting for their biodiversity, isn't it? And especially if you have whole pondscapes of that, then there is also this issue of dispersal between the ponds, and it's very interesting. And they at the same time whether they are just doing nature-based solutions for humans rather than on top of the biodiversity, that's, to my idea, questionable. So but how do you deal with that? So that there could be pondscapes that are very, very important for biodiversity conservation, and where you could find very little in terms of other services that they provide for society, then it will be very important to stress that doesn't mean that they can just go away, because the biodiversity itself should always remain a very important target to conserve.
That's why in the one of the graphic I present, when you see the NBS and the nature contribution to people, we always try to separate the ecosystem services of nature to biodiversity, because we straight have that biodiversity can be a very important value at itself, and we consider separately the both, but we make something after that. But I'm not sure that any ponds are very valuable for biodiversity would have any other advantages, and we ask to people to evaluate the effectiveness for each indicators in a small scale. It's an expert evaluation because we don't have any standardized method that exists. So
Yeah.
So that is one of our questions also, because in our project, so in the methodology, we include ponds that are permanent and ponds that have a short seeded period. And one of the questions is how the fact that they dry faster, they can contribute to the maintenance of the biodiversity. There is like a two strong course of the Ponderful that is focused on biodiversity and also focused on nature-based solutions.
Yeah, okay.
So, yeah.
Patrick, you raise your hand again, so maybe you also have comments on this.
If you talk about temporary ponds, I feel interested.
Yes, of course, I can imagine.
Well, I know quite a bit temporary ponds, Mediterranean temporary ponds, and they do provide some services, not to a large extent, but at least in Morocco, there was a study on the interest of local people in these temporary ponds, and at least they pick up medicinal plants, and they also use these ponds for sheep drinking, or cattle drinking. In less favorable situation, they wash their clothes as well in the ponds, but the result is not fantastic in terms of biodiversity.
I see. Yeah. Well, it's very interesting issues, and I'm sure that you are thinking a lot about them. It's just a matter of the stories that you will just finally tell. That's very important. How you will present the data when you have all collected them. So,
sorry, Jos, did you see Nick's question in the Q&A?
Oh, maybe I missed that one. Let's see. Nick Davison, yes. Okay, hello, Nick. Are you looking at the origins of the ponds? Here in my part of the UK, there is a project on identifying and restoring Ice Age ponds, also called Pingo pools. And you can compare them with created farm ponds, but yeah, of course, very different. We have these Pingo pools in the Netherlands too, by the way, Nick, I know them. So have you thought about that, Aurélie? Marie?
That's not really. That is not one of the focus of the project, in fact, because I think that to look for the origin of the ponds, you will need to, or that's what my thought, you maybe could get sediment cores and use them as a study what is the origin and what is the evolution of the ponds in that sense. But I think that Ponderful has already so many objectives and questions to reply that it will be wonderful to add something like sediment cores, but I think that is out of our hands in that sense, because there are many.
Could be a spin-off maybe. Nick, you want to comment because I see you are
Yes,
also...
maybe with a second wonderful project on the top of the first one.
Yeah, thank you, Joss. That's absolutely fascinating presentation. Here in the UK, we're a bit further north than where you're operating, and we had the consequences of the end of the last ice age. And it's become only quite recently realized that there are a whole suite of ponds which are a consequence of the melting of the ice cap. And we call them Pingo pools, or we call them ice age ponds. And we have a project running in my part of the country to try and identify these and assess their biodiversity value. And they are turning out to have the most remarkable value. So I think, and to work on restoring them. So I think understanding the origin of the ponds you're looking at is very important overall, because that may influence what their biodiversity value is, regardless of how they contribute to carbon storage and everything else. And given that we have a large number of ponds, combined, they can probably contribute quite a lot, but we need to look at the combination, not at the individuals. That was just a comment, and I really appreciate and intrigued by what your work is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dick, for your comments. Well, I think we need to come to a close now. It is 5:30. I think we had a very entertaining afternoon. From the keynotes to the very individual presentations by students and also by staff. It was very interesting. We had the wonderful project. We had all the remote sensing studies. We had very much attention to stakeholder involvement and to reaching out to society, which is so important. And we have addressed that in several different ways and several different degrees and also scales. I also enjoyed very much the presentation on the rights of wetlands. It's also something to explore further, and I really hope that all these activities together will just help us to conserve what we have and build new ones. And that's also what we need to do. We have lost too much in the world of these wonderful systems, and we need to work very hard to build them again and conserve what we have. Okay, let's keep it like this. I want to thank all presenters and also all people who have engaged in discussions. Also, I want to thank all the people working on the technical aspects. Well, and I'm looking forward, of course, to our next day tomorrow. And maybe somebody should count the number of countries that we have on board for the presenters and also for the people who are listening. It should be quite a lot if I just look what we have heard and seen so far. Well, have a good evening, and thank you all very much again, and see you tomorrow.